There we go. Well, I might as well start with the infamous "That's Us Live." Isn't that what I heard yesterday, Highland G, from you on the other chat you were and your. I was amazed that you did like a 2.5 hour chat yesterday on top of it on your channel, and then are offering to host up again today to have a little comic discussion. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
mean,
thank you for having us back on.
it's good fun just to get on with all the different people. And I say most people I chat with are sort of international anyway. So like the best chats I have is the online chats with all the different kind of guys. And I had to kind of try and schedule everybody in around it because a lot of those guys that we didn't get into in that chat so much, but they've just got various things happening in life. Like one of the guys has just had a kid, and one of the guys is trying to move house, and there's various other things kind of going on. And just to kind of get the group together was quite kind of difficult, but it's just really nice to see them back on YouTube as a group, never mind being able to be part of it. So like I felt quite honored to just be part of a chat with them, never mind it being a harsh thing for me to have to do extra work or anything.
Very cool. And you're like double honored today, right? Like this is even better.
Of course. I mean, this is our thing. We've got our own title and everything.
Yeah. Thanks, Sean. You've got a nice whiskey cigarette smoking voice today.
I know, living in Delhi, it's a good thing I quit smoking because it's almost like I didn't quit smoking. But we've been traveling for a little while, attending a couple of comics fests as publishers, and having returned just a couple of days ago, I find myself inundated by the smog, and which is why I sound the way I do. And I'll be sniffling a lot. I'll hopefully keep myself away from the microphone, but this might finally be you gentlemen's opportunity to get a word or two in edgewise because of my, you need me handicapped in this manner in order to stand a chance.
And so, we all wish you to get well soon. And then just reflecting back, how was your experience as a publisher now going to these kind of conventions, and maybe anything you want to share about it?
Oh, it was fantastic. I mean, it's very, very small. It's the Indie Comics Fest that is in multiple cities across India right now. It's not the Comic-Con. The Comic-Con is the huge, big thing, but the Comic-Con is also very commercial and very geared towards movies, video games, television. It's a whole bunch of different things, and a lot of merch and toys and action. And it's great in some ways, but the Indie Comics Fest is sort of focused particularly on comics and the comics medium, and about independent publishing, which, I mean, in India, all comics publishing is independent publishing, but really creator-owned, self-published stuff is very... So it's a thing that Ashweta and I have been big fans of as readers since 2017, 2018, when we discovered it. But this year has been our first as publishers, as having our own work out there in that way. And it's been fantastic just getting to meet people, just a whole bunch of really passionate creators as well as readers. And I've even run into a couple of people who follow the channel, making me feel quite like a celebrity. These guys have been good for my ego, that's for sure.
Paparazzi following you around now. You can't leave your house. No. Yeah. We know how it is.
Very decent folks, but yeah, they were like they were so passionate, and they were like, "Oh, it's because of you I've read this book and that comic," and so we started talking a lot about just our favorite comics and books that we've introduced to each other, etc., which made me feel really good about the kind of stuff that we do, on YouTube and stuff like that. That's really what it's all about, is people saying, "Oh, I started reading Richard Sala because of you," or "I started reading, Jason because of you." And there are a lot of people who come up with their favorite books and want to know what my favorite books are. And after a while, Ashwata's like, "Why don't you guys go talk over there and let me handle the sales over here?" I'm like, okay. No, but it was great. It was great.
It's always nice though when you like. I mean, you don't realize the impact sometimes that you have. Like if you're having even like we'll have these kind of chats and you have people in the comments and all that kind of stuff, but you don't realize that kind of impact you have until you see somebody in like the real world, if you like. And like there's been a few times where I've been in like a local comic shop and someone's just like tapping me on the shoulder and we're like, "Are you Highland G?" And I'm like, and I'm like totally taken back. I'm like, "How the hell do you know?" But it's really cool.
That's great. Yeah. I mean, Yeah, but I think also Highland G, Matt was referring to your video yesterday about Thought Bubble, and I'm only a part of the way through the live stream because that took place at 2 o'clock in the morning over here. But it's very similar to what people were talking about over there. It's nice to be in a place which is just pure comics. It's not really that much about the corporate stuff. It's not about IP and all of this other stuff. And it's just about people who are making comics and people who love reading comics and discovering comics and discovering new readers and not having this huge celebrity culture, myself notwithstanding, not having all of that stuff associated with it, which places like Comic-Con and other things can become about. It can become a lot about the noise, whereas this is very much, in a much, much, much smaller way than Thought Bubble. But the way that Thought Bubble is to Comic-Con, maybe you could think of something like the Indie Comics Fests that we were attending is in relation to Thought Bubble itself. So, yeah, very, very cool to be that close into that sort of, writer, artist community and seeing all the different kinds of approaches and all the different types of comics, many of which, even in a comics forward area like the United States or the UK, maybe you're not going to see it in mainstream comic. These are very peculiar and odd little things, and a lot of them have potential for mainstream appeal as well. But you know what I mean. It's just the kind of stuff that you were talking about yesterday. So very reminiscent of that for me.
I like the idea of being able to see, I guess, like the other side of the kind of spectrum. Like a lot of the time, the focus will be very specifically on, say, like let's just say like artists, and then above that it'll be as you said, like the IP, or if like actors have done that, like character and things like that. But it's nice to know that there are places where like someone like the colorist or the letterer can shine, and actually get that time as well, so it's nice to see that there are the two sort of sides of things available.
Yeah, and at a comic convention like that too, when it's smaller like that, it's focused on comics versus a Comic-Con where people are showing up to get freebies or to get limited edition things so they can go and resell them on eBay so they can buy what they actually really want. You actually get people that have some passion and they're there for actually the comics instead of all the peripheral stuff that goes on, or waiting in line and getting autographs and all that stuff.
Yeah.
What were the autograph fees from your end? What did you charge? What were you raking in?
We got to pay people to, just like, would you like this comic? Like, yes, if I sign it. Oh, do I get a discount if you sign it? You've defaced it now.
Yeah, I always get blown away. I was looking the other day. There's it used to be called there's a Star Trek convention that goes around the US, and it used to be called like Star Trek, and go Star Trek Las Vegas or Chicago or whatever. And because of copyright, they had to change it to ST. And I was looking online at they're coming to Chicago next year, and I'm like, it was like $200 for a picture with a celebrity and like $149 for an autograph. And I'm like, not to knock anybody that does that, but I'm like, that's absurd to me. I couldn't imagine paying, first of all, somebody to sign something, me personally, or to get a picture with them. I'm like, just blows me away.
Yeah. But it's not uncommon, right? In the United States, I think it's quite common. And even like, I've heard stories about, Stan Lee, of course, who is sort of famous for having done that. But there are so many people, I think I see the stuff on social media that precedes Comic-Con, etc. And it's always like signings and, $50 for an autograph, $100, and commissions and all of that stuff. I understand, but I agree with you. I think just the signature costing money is a weird thing. I mean, I love signatures, and I won't say that I haven't paid for a signed copy on eBay or something like that, like a signed hardcover. I have, but I think it's kind of weird when you take it all into that standing in line to get an autograph that you pay for. But on the other hand, people are free to do with what they want with their money.
But then you also don't want like someone to turn up with a stack of like 50 books to get signed just to flip on eBay.
Right. I mean,
like if they're going to profit off your signature, then at a certain point you either want to make some money off that signature yourself, or you want to stop them doing as much of that, so that those who do want your signature as a fan is going to get it rather than someone who's going to flip it.
Right. Yeah, I've never thought about that industrialization of it. Maybe it should be like drugs, where the first one's free and then the subsequent ones cost you.
Or it's free if you write like a personalized thing, like to, John,
Like,
but it's not
this
free.
one's for
it's just-
John, and this one's for Matthew, which is my middle name, and my last name is Richard.
You just want a signature, in the sense of like sign and flip something, then they charge you. Like, I don't know, something like that. But I know, I think it's Mark Hamill, like the guy from Star Wars. Like, he started charging an absolute fortune for his signature because people were flipping it, just to stop them flipping them.
Yeah.
Just
I think
and part
we're
of it's
still
my
very far away here from that kind of a culture, but it might be there in movie stars or cricket stars, sports stars, etc.
Yeah.
It certainly doesn't exist in comics and authorship at that level.
Yeah, I mean, I feel it's more of a Western thing anyway, because I was at one of the music festivals one year, and I waited to kind of get something signed in a your normal kind of queue. You wait to see the kind of band after you kind of watched them on the stage. You can kind of go and get signatures and things, and they had all these big signs up saying like you can't take pictures and you can't do X, Y, and Z because there's like certain places that you can go get that done afterwards and you can kind of pay for it. And I remember this specific band because they were a Finnish band, and the guys at the signing desk were just like, you want a picture? Cool, okay. And they just like hopped around the desk and let you take like a selfie with them. They were like, ignore that sign. I don't give a toss. I'm not American.
Yeah.
And I just thought it was really funny.
Yeah, and part of it for me, I think, is just the a different growing up in a different age, right? It's like you said, it's become the norm here, and it's kind of like when I think back to like when Netflix first went to this idea of password sharing. Like, oh, if we're going to cut down on password sharing, and if you want to have somebody sign up, you pay $7 extra, whatever it might be, and you can have them share your password. And when they first came out with that, I was like, well, if everybody just banded together and said 6 months, everybody's going to cancel Netflix because of it, they would never have implemented it. They would have reversed course, but nobody would do it. Right. And so it became ingrained, and now basically every streamer does that. And I felt it was the same way kind of as fees went up for autographs and stuff like that. If people just quit showing up, they would reverse course on how they were going to do it. But not everybody's going to band together and do that. I mean, we can't get everybody to agree on, if it's day or night most of the time. So much less try to band together for something like that. But
yeah, I mean, there's also that fear that if you're the only person that abandons it, then you just miss out.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of people that just won't.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And it, it's interesting, for Love Comics, you mentioned this idea of like making a recommendation to somebody and then having them talk about how meaningful it is to you, or how meaningful it is to them. And then how it kind of affects us when we make a recommendation that resonates with somebody. And, my last reread, our topic for today, was based off of that, where I had some interaction with somebody on Blue Sky that was just getting back into comics. And, he had read, I think he had read the N.K. Jemisin Green Lanterns one. I can't think of the name of it off the top of my head right now. Far Sector, that's what it is. He had read Far Sector and said he really liked it and was looking for recommendations. And I had recommended with the investigation piece, I'd recommended some books. Criminal, really, all the Brubaker stuff hit home with them. But I'm trying to think of other ones like Lock and Key and some other ones. But he was like, just, the pleasure that I got out of recommending my favorites, New Frontier, Lock and Key, some of these books just really hit home with me. And then he read Gotham Central and he was posting pictures of it and talking about how great it was. And so, of course, then it hit me. And I was like, oh, I went and grabbed Gotham Central. So that was one of my rereads this year, was actually going back through and rereading that. But it kind of ties right into the topic that we want to cover for today. Right. And so maybe if you want to put up that first prompt.
Ooh, we got prompts.
Yep. And so I'm thinking of this your history of reading and kind of a big, like, lifelong reading picture. If you reflect back on like your whole life of rereading, and then maybe how it's changed over the last 5 to 10 years, if it has at all. So a little more current, but like, as you think back to being a kid, did you reread books? And then what's your path to rereading, if at all, at this point? And I get to pick now. I'm in charge. Or we could just talk for an hour and a half about Star Trek. So either one of those topics is perfectly fine with me. But I get to pick. So Highland G, you get to go first because I'm in control today.
Wow. Yeah, for a second there, I was kind of like thinking about more recently kind of comics, but now that you've mentioned like how you started with comics, I kind of go back to the idea of like when I was younger, things were more limited to me. So like I would get a limited amount of kind of comics, or I get like one computer game a year or that kind of thing. And when you had limited stuff, you tended to kind of get the absolute most out of it you could. So you would reread it and reread it and reread it to get as much enjoyment out of it, simply because you didn't have anything else. So I guess that would be my starting point with stuff, was I would just read for the joy of reading, not necessarily because it was the best story, but because it was the book I had. And I would read whether or not it was a book that I bought, or like if I went to like my grandparents and they picked up something from like a sort of car boot sale or jumble sale, something like that. I would just read whatever, because I enjoyed comics over novels. So if it was available to me, I would just kind of read it. So I think that's maybe where I kind of started, and then there would be a progression to when I kind of got more into sort of American comics as I got older. My rereads probably were more when I upgraded. So if I bought something in like trades or singles and then I bought it in like a hardcover, I would reread it, probably, if nothing else, to justify the fact that I bought the upgrade. Like, why am I buying it again if I'm not going to reread it again? Like, it kind of doesn't make sense. So I would only upgrade things that I enjoyed, but that would kind of prompt me to reread that specific book whenever that upgrade came out, or whatever it kind of was. But then more recently, it's probably been things like, if I just really enjoy a certain character, or if there's a specific thing that I kind of get out that book. Like I've been trying to read some books in like German, for instance. So like I'm rereading them partly for the story, but partly also to help with learning German. So there's like, things like that kind of come into the mix as well.
Interesting. Yeah. And so this jumps ahead a couple of prompts, but we can touch on it now. So I think like one of the things that maybe were, as we got the means to get a bigger collection like that, those shelves and shelves and shelves behind For the Love of Comics, it tends to, for me anyways, I don't reread as much because I got access to so much more. So yeah, it sounds like as a kid, like I'm the same way. We had that same, you've only got a handful of supplies. So it was like, you just kept rereading them. But as our collections grow, there's less time, I think, to reread, or we dedicate less time to reread because of all the new stuff we've got on our shelves. But For the Love of Comics, what about you? Yeah. What about your reading history?
Yeah, like, I mean, I'd say absolute 100% match over here, because my history of rereading is my history of reading. I've been rereading as long as I've been, I've been rereading as long as I've been reading, because of the same reasons that Highland G elaborated on, because they were limited. You get something and then you have to wait until you get the next thing. And in that period of waiting, you read over and over again. And even when you do get the next thing, you consume it within a very short period of time. Even a novel, it's going to last you, what, a week, maybe 10 days, and then you're done with that. And then you're not getting a new book every 10 days, at least not in my memory. But I think that also created for me a sense of taste. And because there is a certain omnivorousness at one age, like everything is the same. It's like everyone is your friend. If they live next to you and they're free when you are, they're your friend. But as you get older, you become more choosy or picky. You add more discrimination, because you add more things of what you like and what you don't like in the company you keep. And I think about books and reading in a very similar way, that I was absolutely omnivorous at a certain age, but it was the rereading that told me which one I really liked, So I'd get this comic and I'd get that comic, and it would even sometimes be within the same comic. Like we used to get a lot of Archie digests, And that was one of the big comics reading. This massive comics reading, but these Archie digests would have things from the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s sort of all mixed together. And it was very similar with some of the Disney comics that we had, that there were some stories within these that just stood out to me. And many years later, I would develop that sort of thing like, oh, that was a Carl Barks Uncle Scrooge story, as opposed to those other stories. There was something in it. And like, do I like Carl Barks because I read him when I was young? Or did I read a whole bunch of stuff when I was young? And I know Carl Barks is great because he's the one I reread the most. So it became that way, with me, is that Dandy Carlo and Harry Lucy in the comics of Archie. I might get these names much later into my brain, but there were certain stories that stood out for me. And it was the same thing with the Tintin Adventures. It was the same thing with the Asterix comics. I'd read everything at least once or twice. Maybe I'd even read everything 3 times. But the thing I read 4 and 5 and 6 and 7 times, you knew that was something special. Yeah. So, absolutely, it's in the same way. And I think it's also the same thing that you mentioned, Blackpool, as we got older. And I'm going to wait till the next prompt. But the other history of rereading as an adult that has come up, because I really, really value rereading. But the one thing that was interesting is doing YouTube and making YouTube videos, because I would end up rereading something, and I never quite made like, oh, this is the newest book that's out, or this is what's come out this week. It's always been on my channel. It's always been like, here are some of my favorite comics, and these are comics that I've read many times before, but I may have read them a long time before. But when I decide to make a video on them, I'd reread them for making that video. And so that ended up being a reason to reread, just the way that upgrades are for Highland G as well.
Interesting. Yeah.
And I said a similar thing with making videos, that like, I wouldn't want to make a video on a book that I hadn't read at least twice, because I'd feel like I was, I don't know, like out my depth a little bit, or I wasn't really able to like properly critique something that I just kind of skimmed through once. So like, you want to have that little bit more depth, and you also want to have it fresh in your mind if you're going to be talking about it.
Yeah. That's a great point for the idea of creating content and trying to offer something up to the comic community by actually knowing the material kind of inside and out. I know I think back to, I often think about it when I'm in the middle of a book, and if something really grabs me and it's action packed and the book is moving along, I don't want to spend so much time digging into all the nitty gritty when I'm really enjoying the story of it. And so that first read through, I take everything in, but it doesn't get like processed at a deeper level. It's not until that second reread when I decide, okay, I'm halfway through the book, I'm loving it. All right, I know I'm going to reread this at some point. So I'll basically like not have to get into the finer details, knowing that a second read, I can slow down a little bit and pay more attention. And so, yeah, you guys have seen that over the last, like, say, decade or so of being on YouTube, making content, that your rereading has changed a little bit because of the fact that you're putting out content, at least. Any other ways that in the last, like, say, 5-10 years, your thoughts about rereading or your actual rereading itself has changed besides that?
We're waiting for you to assign
Highland G.
who goes first.
Puppet Master, Highland G.
I mean, I'd say that like sometimes I like to read things slightly differently. I think we've kind of discussed this a little bit previously, where like I might focus on reading like the actual text the first time I'm sort of reading something through, but once I've kind of absorbed that after like a read or maybe a second read, I can then on a third or fourth read take more time to pay attention to the art and other things, because I pretty much know the text. So you can get other things out of the book.
What about you for Low Comics?
I mean, I don't think my rereading the act itself has changed that much, but I think the way I think about it and the way I articulate, talk about it has definitely sharpened, because I honestly feel that rereading is a must in order to understand or appreciate something. It's almost like, I wouldn't say militant, but I don't think you can count something in your top 5 or top 10 or whatever unless you've read it more than once, just because I've become more aware of how slippery memory is and how, as you said, Blackpool, when you're reading it, how you tend to focus on certain things and ignore certain other things, how it seems to almost have an agenda.
Yeah.
And then when you come back to it, it's a different agenda. And that agenda is so different that it changes the book that you're reading. It changes the material in your hands. And that realization, I think, for me it's become so crucial that and this isn't only about comics and reading, but prose and movies in many ways as well, it's almost one of the definitions of what makes something art to me. I mean, there are 2 or 3 different ways or more to slice it, but one of the definitions is it's something that rewards you or continues to reward you upon revisitation. That's one of the distinguishing factors of art, because there are many things that I think are extremely entertaining and but you kind of have it all in the first go, because when you come back to it, you have a diminished experience, or it's not as great as the first time you read something or the first time you watched it. It's like it peaked in that first time. You still need that second time to have that comparison, but it's the thing that rewards you again and gives you a different view that I think gets exalted and put on a different level, and that level being art or literature or something like that. So for me especially, I think how I think about the act of rereading has evolved to me giving it a lot of value, a lot of respect, and a lot of importance. I think it's very important to reread, and it's a shame that I don't get to reread as much as I would like to.
Yeah. You're that idea of like the agenda kind of the first time. I think of it sometimes when I'm in a good book like that, there's just that energy to it. Like there's just that you're caught in the flow of it, and the story's just so well that you're kind of wrapped up. And then the second reread for me a lot of times is like, oh, I remember reading that, but I know why it's important now, because I know where the end is. And I know how this really slots in a more interesting way than on a cursory read. And so the depth kind of grows. And I actually tend to, even if that first read, I'm just kind of like, it's all the energy just moving me through because it's so good. The second time is almost more rewarding because I really get to see how well crafted it was on top of how good of a story it was. Like, wow, they really this is a unique way to insert whatever it might be and have it play out long term. And so, yeah, I can definitely come to see that.
Yeah, and I think that even that velocity that you're talking about, that velocity, you feel it as a pure sensation perhaps in the first time, but the second time you're reading it, or maybe the third or fourth time, you get to see why it has that velocity, why it has that effect on you. And that is such an enjoyable thing. It's like seeing through the matrix or something like that. It's like you're getting, but it doesn't spoil anything for you. In fact, that's one of those few things which, like a magician's trick, once you know how it's done, it seems diminished. But with literature, with things that are fantastically crafted, seeing how it does it makes it greater, not lesser. And I think that's an amazing experience to have. I also think that there have been other times, which is the complete opposite, where the first time I was not enthralled, or the first time I was reading something, for whatever reason, maybe my expectations were off, or I wanted to be faster and the book wanted to be slower. There could be a million different reasons. I just had a bad lunch, indigestion was acting up, but you just didn't enjoy yourself. I didn't enjoy yourself as much. And if you took that as being the be all end all judgment on that work, I mean, it's valid, it's fair, but I think sometimes rereading shows you that it's something else altogether, that you were wrong the first time, that you missed something and you completely misread something, or maybe, the bad day you were having overshadowed things too much because it's different. And there are other things. And I think I've heard people mentioned Day Tripper as one of those examples, but there are a number of comics or books like that, that the work itself seems to take on a different meaning depending on where you are in life when you read it.
Yeah.
And that is the thing that rereading gets you, is that it's not necessarily about revisiting the same work. It's about being a different person and the work responding to you and being different because of who you are now. And I think that joy is, it's one of those great pleasures to realize that when I was 18 and when I'm 28, the same book hits completely differently. And why makes you examine not just the craft of the book, but your life and how you've changed and what is different between, you and the world at this age than it was the previous age. And I think that's one of those things about rereading that is truly magical, that way it allows for a certain kind of self-examination, with the same object.
Yeah. It makes me think a little bit of the, as you're talking about like the seeing the craft of it on future rereads and stuff like that. It also, even if it's just been like a 3 or 5 year period and you're, you are a reader, you've gained new insights over those 3 to 5 years, whether we like to slow down and think about them or not. And so one of the other things that the reread does for me anyways, is make me think about the storytelling. Like, what is grabbing me in this story? Why does the story actually work outside of the mechanics? Like there's a mechanical part, but then there's also the idea of the mythology of storytelling and what it means to be human and to have storytelling being just part of who we are for, eons and eons. And so there's just so many layers to it as you get into rereading, and it takes a little self-reflection though, to pay attention to like, why does this resonate with me so well outside of the craft of how it was created and the storytelling? But what are what's the deeper ideas here, philosophy here around why storytelling is so impactful and why we continue to do it as human beings, right?
Yeah.
All right. Well, Highland G, any final comments? Otherwise, I'll have you throw up the next prompt.
The only other thing I kind of mention is kind of along the same lines of what you guys have kind of said, is like, even if you've not really kind of changed that much as a person from the first read to the second read, there's going to be the difference in the sort of excitement of absorbing something for the first time, whether it's good or bad. And when you read it that second time, you're reading it more purely almost, because you're no longer in that either excited or not, as the case may be, kind of mood. So like, I've read a few things and it's almost like a, does it still hold up type thing of like, I really enjoyed it the first time around, but was that just because I was super hyped about getting a new book? Or is it actually genuinely one of my favorite reads kind of thing? So like, there's that element that you get in that second read, even if you haven't really, majorly changed your position in life.
Yeah, that's interesting. So there's more of an intentionality almost, like on the second read. Like, I've read it once. I gotta have, for me anyways, I feel like I've got to have more of an intention to like, I gotta go and grab this again, versus the first time it's something new I just bought, I'm gonna read it. I did it for a reason. But there's almost a level of intentionality in there that adds a little weight to the multiple reads. I like that.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point about that intentionality, and because it's I think what I was thinking about with the agenda is that the first time you're almost a little passive, relatively speaking, because you're going to be carried along by the fact that every page is something that you haven't encountered before. Whereas from the second read onwards, you know exactly what you're getting into. You're intending to wallow in it, but you're also ready to do your own thinking rather than have the book do all of the thinking for you, which is usually the way it is the first time. You're seeing, what do you got for me? And then the second time you're like, what do we got for each other? It's kind of a weird substitution over there.
That's an interesting way to think about it. I like that the relationship changes a little bit between you and it. Yeah. Good. Yeah, we got I'm gonna butcher that name. Ritwick. Ritwick?
Yeah, Ritwik's got a comment about Tintin. And
Yeah,
this is something very close to my heart because I think, and I know a lot of people this way, that we read these Tintin comics so much that we do have them memorized. There's very few things that I would say I have memorized. Maybe pop songs. That's it. But we have them memorized to the panel structure and the contents of the panel and the page layouts and all of that kind of thing. It's that sort of I think one of the points that Ritwik is bringing up is that the rereading actually asserts something into our memory in a much more concrete and a much more solid manner, because sometimes I'll talk about something and I'll just be kind of vaguely talking about something because I have a vague recollection of it, but something that I've reread many times, I'll be able to quote, I'll be able to give you a direct citation, but it'll be so specific that I'll be able to do more with it. It's the way that when people take a particular quote and they're able to unpack it, or they're able to take a piece of music and they're able to deconstruct it, you need a certain level of familiarity before you can do that level of analysis. So I think it makes us, in some ways, it makes us more critical thinkers. It makes us better analyzers when we revisit something and familiarize ourselves to such an extent that we are doing away with some of the mystique, but really uncovering more of the mystique. So Tintin is one of those perfect examples, because I've spoken about this before. There's like stitching on a leather glove of a hand that's pulling the emergency brake of a train, that I have seared into my mind. So it's not just like the story or the characters or something like that. It's the images that are so specific. And I think later on in life, it's something like Watchmen, which, I read a lot because there was so much to unpack in it, and I found new things in it all the time. And now there are things from Watchmen, when he's on Mars, and how the nostalgia bottle is juxtaposed against graffiti and things like that, the kind of recurring symbols and shapes and things like that in the comics vocabulary, that I think I get to have an appreciation of Watchmen because I've sort of seared those things into my brain.
Yeah. I figured you'd enjoy the Tintin comment. Hand that right off to you. Yeah. All right. Yeah. Let's go to prompt 2 then. So I think we might have covered quite a bit of this, but I am curious, and this time we'll start with you for the love of comics, since I started with Hanji last time. Is there anything we didn't cover about why it's so important? We obviously, I think the first part, is it important? I think we've kind of covered that, but is there anything we've covered that, like, why the rereads are more important that we haven't discussed yet?
Yeah, I mean, this is interesting. One of the things I did think about is rereading or rewatching or any other kind of revisitation, is it hampered today with having so much at our fingertips, like summaries or Wikipedia entries or YouTube clip videos, and someone just going over it? And then it's a variation, I think, on people who just have read the headline as they've scrolled past things. And so therefore they know X happened, but they don't really have a larger context of it. And it reminds me of an English literature exam I gave, like in 11th grade or 10th grade, I think it was. And it was quite ridiculous, because it's supposed to be a literature exam, and there was some Wordsworth poem, Lucy goes missing and her parents are looking for her, or something like that. Whatever's copyright free, comes into your textbook. But instead of analyzing the poem from the point of view of literature, or what is the author trying to say, and what is poetry, and all of that stuff, it was, what are the 3 places Lucy's parents went to look for her? And in the exam, you were supposed to write, they went to the wall, they went to the well, they went, and it's ridiculous, because it's not literature. It's not the study of literature. It's not the study of poetry. It's not analyzing the poem. It's not reading the poem. It's making it a bunch of facts that you memorize, but that doesn't mean you've appreciated the poem. It doesn't mean you felt a song or a ballad. So sometimes I think what happens without rereading and just having summaries and just saying, X happens and then Y happens, you forget the important thing isn't what happens. The important thing is how did the storyteller tell the story?
Mhm.
And it's a thing that we kind of know, right? Like the plot isn't the story. If the three of us attended a party, I mean, that would never happen because I don't go to parties. But if we attended a party and then we were telling a fourth person what happened at the party last night, we would tell plot wise maybe the same thing. But the style and the manner in which we told it would be very different because we're three different kinds of storytellers, and how we did suspense and how we did these things would be very different. So I think rereading, apart from the ones that I talked about, is that's how you know something is literature and that's how you think. I think rereading is important because it says that, no, it's the thing itself that I am engaging with, and it's the thing itself I'm wrestling with, and not the most basic points of it boil down to sort of a cheap facsimile bullet list of facts, which is a very surface level engagement. And I think that deeper engagement requires us to actually read something ourselves rather than take someone's summary or someone's clip show as a substitute. I mean, I think those things are valuable when you're doing a certain kind of reference and citation, but it's not the same thing as reading. And that's why, that's one of the things I would say is why it's important.
Yeah, that analogy of the party is really interesting because it's almost like I think about the rereads really help you hear a creator's voice and actually pick out the uniqueness of creators' voices. A lot of comics we can read them and just think that they're, it's just the storytelling going on. And Tom King sounds like Jason Aaron, sounds like Colin Bunn, whatever. But the more we reread, I think the more we start to actually get it deeper at what sets that creator apart from other creators on how they decide to tell their story. Like you said, like being at a party. Yeah, it's an interesting point. Alan G, what about you? Anything else we didn't cover on what makes rereading important for you?
I think also kind of stepping aside from the way that things were kind of created or put together, but even just the story itself, you're able to pick up on like moments more. You're able to delve more into them and experience them, slow down on them, things like that you might not have done the first time round. Like I think what sort of Angstrom was saying earlier with the idea of you're kind of reading something for the first time, you don't know what's coming, so you've kind of set a pace in your mind and you're just kind of reading at the pace that you've kind of set. But once you've done that and you're going back for a reread, if you know that some big emotional part's going to kind of come up in the story, or some big elaborate art section is going to kind of come up next or something, you can deliberately slow down and appreciate that section of the story a bit more, take more time on it. And I think that's something that you just don't focus on doing the first time you're kind of taking anything in, because you don't have the knowledge to know what's kind of coming up to prepare yourself for certain things.
Yeah, it's another spot that it's like we go into a book and we might know a little bit about what it is, but it's how they're going to get from point A to point B may be real nebulous. It might be super huge. And so the first time, all the expectations are kind of out the window because we've got this broad where this may lead, what road it might go down. We start to think that it's going to go one way, it doesn't. And then after that read, and we come back and we have maybe at least a little more inkling of a straighter path. And so our focus kind of comes down and narrows more on those second reads. And I never thought about it in that term, but it'll be something that I'll pay attention to going forward. I like that kind of idea. Yeah. Yeah. And I think for me, I mean, we've covered a lot of why rereading is important, but I think one of the things that we're real technical, we're real philosophical in what it is. And I also think just stepping back of like just the enjoyment piece, like just the rereading for just the pure enjoyment piece. And I think about it as something as silly as like I had just recently reread I think I reread it. It was the Harley Quinn, the Big Bang Tour thing or whatever, 6 issues, really easy to breeze through, but just kind of a fun, lighthearted read. And so sometimes my rereads aren't as much about the technical, aren't as much about diving in. It's just about, I love this story. I want to read it again. I think back to some Jack London that I read, some short stories I read from him in junior high and high school, and revisiting those. And instead of having to dive back in, like having to like kind of critique it or having the mind go to that part, it just wants to sit in the nostalgia of like, it's almost resting in like the 10th grade me who didn't have all the baggage that I have now in middle age, doesn't have an aging body, and just was a naive kid enjoying it. And so it really brings me back to that time frame, and that feels good.
And you can kind of
Yeah, I
immerse
think-
yourself in that experience or that world that you've enjoyed in the past.
Yeah, I think familiarity, I don't, is this one thing we're not talking about, but yes, sometimes the pleasure of familiar, the pleasure of a known thing, it's like being in your living room on your couch, and over the years, it's taken on the shape of your butt. It's like, yeah, that's what I want right now. Just something that remembers me. But yeah, I think that's something that I've often wondered about, is that when I read, am I transporting myself back to where I was? And I think it really depends on the thing you're reading. There'll be certain things. I think one of my most potent examples, and I've mentioned this in a couple of my videos, are the little He-Man and the Masters of the Universe mini comics that used to come with the action figures. And there's something about them that, and I don't want to like disparage them, because some of them have really good art, as has been pointed out to me by viewers as well. And there are some artists of the Filipino invasion, for example, who also drew over there. So you'll have Alfredo Alcala for sure, who was also on Rick Veitch and the Swamp Thing with the Alan Moore run. And you'll have, I think, I'm not sure, but Nestor Redondo and a couple of other people. So there's great art in it. But even outside of that, there's something so immediately transportive that they're these cheesy stories that get wrapped up very, very easily. The threat is just nonsensical. So nothing about an adult intellectual approach is going to be rewarded over there. But that nostalgia, familiarity factor for me, it's a potent drug where I can completely overlook any kind of intellectual critical thing just to be reminded very, very briefly and perhaps imperfectly of that 9-year-old 10-year-old reading those comics, which is, I mean, it has to be recognized.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like music in that way, where like if you heard a certain, band or singer when you were a certain age and you associate it with that time period, or you got given, those albums from a specific person that you haven't seen recently, when you re-listen to that album, you're reminded of that person or that time. And it's the same thing with rereading your comics. So like, to me, if I go back to the old Scottish kind of like comics, like the Beano and the Bruins and that kind of stuff, it reminds me of my grandparents. It reminds me of, being young and going on those like monthly visits and all those kind of things, along with the story of the book.
Yeah. That's interesting. I think about like the, as you said, for love comics, this idea of like, especially because we have winters here where I'm at. And so like curling up on the couch with a blanket, cup of coffee right next to the window on a Saturday when it's dreary and it's snowing and you're not going to go anywhere and you've got a refrigerator full of food, and just diving into some comfort read from when I was younger and how much enjoyment that brings. And it kind of leads to a sidebar question based off of this, is like, do you tend to read more for comfort reading in that style, or for the critical style reading where you're more interested in the story versus just the comfort side of it? Highland G, start with you. We'll put you on the spot.
Yeah. I'd probably say a bit of both, but I probably personally lean more into the kind of comfort side of it, of like the memories of that book.
Oh, wow.
Like, I probably, as I've got older, have got more critical when I'm kind of like reading things, not in a bad way, but like I'll analyze things more, and I'll look at art and notice things I didn't notice before, and I might even notice imperfections that I wouldn't have noticed the first time I kind of read through things. But I'm not rereading the book to find those imperfections. I'm rereading the book because I have a fond memory of when I last read the book.
Yeah. What about you for Love Comics?
I really think it depends on the book. I think I may have a judgment on the book, and the judgment that I already have determines what my reread is going to be. So if I have a judgment of, oh, this is sweet fluff cotton candy from my childhood, then my reread is going to be more nostalgia, comfort based. If my thing is like, I didn't quite like that, but these guys on the live stream last night said it was fantastic. So maybe I should give it a second look. Then my reread big takes on a much more critical, but also critical of myself to like, hey, why don't you keep an open mind this time instead of going with your preconceived notion? And then there might be a third one in which I'm just like, man, that was fantastic when I last read it. I'm kind of nervous about going back to it. What if it's not as good as I remember it being? And what if I feel really foolish about myself? So then it's a guarded sort of, tightrope act kind of reread. So I do think it differs from time to time, from book to book and from work to work and how I'm looking at it. There was one episode of 31 Days of Comics that I did, which was a book you loved that you'll never read again.
Oh.
And I ended up not being able to understand that category at all. I couldn't understand, but there were people in the comments who said, well, I don't know about comics, but when it comes to movies, and they named very hard hitting movies and things that emotionally hollow you out. And so, Grave of the Fireflies and Requiem for a Dream and stuff like that,
That's what I was thinking of. It was Grave of the Fireflies.
that one gets pulled up over there all the time, as in like that. But I don't know if any book or any comic has affected me that way. I certainly think about movies, and they don't even have to be great masterpiece movies. They could just be movies that I appreciated in a certain way. There was some Nicolas Cage movie called 8mm about snuff films and stuff like that, And I remember watching it and going, well, that wasn't bad, but I never want to see it again. But it wasn't necessarily because it was extremely gory. It was just, there was something about it that, I was just like, I got what I needed to out of it and things like that. But when I think about comics, I'm not sure if I've ever felt that way, because even my pick for that day was going to be Elmer by Jerry Alangulan, which was a comic about chickens suddenly coming sentient and then realizing what kind of a massacre has been happening and society changing and etc. But it's actually about a father and son chicken. And I was just like, I don't know if I want to read it again, but I did read it again, and it ended up being like great because I read it again. Like, I remember it being good, but I remember it being hard. But when I read it again, I was like, yeah, it is in some ways, but it's also absurd. It's also funny. And for some reason, I was only remembering the hardness and I wasn't remembering the comedy. And so that's one of those things that we talked about is that, yeah, you should read it. It's important because you'll correct some preconceived notions or you'll correct some incorrect memories, like our memories are faulty. We have things like the halo effect, and something that has happened recently tends to feel like it's always been happening. There's a lot of that kind of stuff. So if the book ends sadly, you think it's a sad book, but that's not necessarily the case. Similarly, if the book ends on a happy note, you think it's a happy adventure, but you forget like how dark it was, like some of the kids' movies we watched as a kid. You're just like, I forgot the Dark Crystal or the Never Ending Story had, that stuff in it, etc. But I think that's why that importance of rereading comes through is like it cements your love, or it gives you that distinction. Whether you're taking a critical or nostalgic view of it, I think depends on the book. But I somewhere, and maybe this is not true, but I somewhere think that it's all critical. Even if you think about it only as nostalgia, there is some, I think there is, and I think we might get to this point later, is do you think it's dangerous to reread? So not to step on your toes, Blackpool, with your prompts, but, as an offshoot thing, we're talking about how great rereading is and how wonderful rereading is. I'd be interested in knowing, starting with you down there, I'd be interested in knowing if you think the reverse is ever true, where it's not good or it should be avoided or it should be taken with some caution.
Well, it's interesting because that leads into one thing that just popped into my mind while you were talking about this idea of like, it's what sets the medium apart to a certain extent, right? So like when I had watched Grave of the Fireflies, that's the first one that came to my mind when you started down that path. I was like, wow, that was outstanding. And I never want to put myself through that again. And part of it is because you're out of control of the medium, right? You're at the medium storytelling. Sure, you can pause it and walk away and stuff like that. But I feel like with comics, if it gets to that level, I can disengage a little bit easier, and I can shut the book and be okay with setting it down for a few days and coming back to it when I'm at a better mindset. Where I wouldn't do that with a movie per se. I wouldn't stop the movie halfway through and come back 4 days later and pick it up at that spot. Just not the way I like to consume media. And so I think it's one of the unique things about reading and comics, and that just this idea of that even the hard stuff, we can slow down and process it. We can shut the book for 3 minutes and kind of just think about it, try to understand it a little bit, make yourself a cup of coffee, and then come back and pick it back up. So yeah, I think the medium lends itself to being with some harder topics, maybe in a little bit more of a way that you can do it over and over again versus some of those movies. I'm thinking the other one I thought of was the Breaking Bad series. The first time I watched I've watched it twice all the way through. And the first time I watched it, I was just so enraptured with it that I burned right through it in like a matter of just a couple of weeks because all the seasons were out. And the second time I went through it, I really struggled. I was like, holy shit, they really put Jesse through the ringer in this show. Like the brutality and the gruesomeness of it. I'm like, part of it again is the fact that I was a little bit older, a little bit, hopefully a little bit wiser, a little bit more compassionate. But I was just like, it was hard to watch the second time through and gave me a lot of pause versus the first time where I just burned through it. And looking at my shelves, I don't think anything that I have that I wouldn't consider like not rereading and it being great. So I think that's an interesting spot though to pay attention to for me anyways. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I have a couple of thoughts on there's like two different kind of topics there a little bit. There's the idea of like not wanting to reread something because of, I guess, like the topic or the kind of the harshness of the kind of thing. I don't think personally that would put me off so much. I think if something was extremely dry, factual kind of storytelling where it's it's like a reaccount of history or something like that, and there's literally no real input from the author or artist to make it anything other than that, then once I've taken in those facts, I don't really feel the need to address that. But with comics, that's really difficult for someone to actually do because they're going to put their art style in it. They're going to put their way of, putting that across. So as opposed to an encyclopedia, there's always going to be those creators kind of inputs and kind of feels to those things. So you're never going to have that completely dry experience. But that's probably the closest I would get to something that I don't want to reread, because it's not because it's bad to reread, but more because I just feel I've got everything I'm going to get out of it.
Right. There can also be stuff that is just, sorry for interrupting, but there can just be stuff that is just you didn't enjoy it and you don't want to reread it because it was stupid, right? Yeah.
I was meaning specifically
about, like,
things
stuff you really
did enjoy
that you never want to reread. That's a weird category.
Yeah.
So if you read a book that was like, let's just pick a random thing, like it's the history of like the Second World War or something, and they've hit all these bullet points and it's really like dry story of it, but they've not put any personal take on it. They've not put any characters or people that they knew into that story. They've not put, their art style into it. They've kept it really kind of plain. Then that would be a very dry experience, which would make me less inclined to kind of come back to it. But as I said, with comics, that's quite difficult because if you get somebody doing that, they're always going to have their way of doing things and their style of kind of putting that kind of in there. To go at the other kind of point you guys are making as far as like, is it dangerous to reread something? The way I kind of feel about that is that like each experience of reading something is its own entity. And like, even if you did read something a second time and not enjoy it for whatever reason, that doesn't take away the fact that you enjoyed it the first time. So like there's been many books where I've read, like for instance, various DC character books where I've read the books all alongside each other and experienced like the whole universe at once. And then I've kind of come back and read the omnibus of like just one character and I've been like, that was a bit lackluster. but it doesn't ruin the fact that I remember, you know, the first time I read it and how enjoyable that was. So it's just a different experience.
Yeah, that's interesting because to me, like say a sequel never ruins the original movie or the like something like if issue 40 is terrible and it goes off the deep end, the earlier issues continue to be great. But if I come back to something and it is less than what I remember it being, or it now I don't like it. And that's happened with comics a number of times to me. I think most famously it's happened with 100 Bullets. But, we've talked about 100 Bullets. I feel like poor Brian Azzarello gets shit on by me all the time. But it also happened with me with movies, like, say, with American Beauty. Like, the first time I saw it, I was like, wow, what a great movie, And the second time I saw it, I was like, ugh, like, man, that's real self-indulgent, what have you. It didn't have the magic. Now, what I do remember is the experience of going and watching that movie with my friends and all of us being so impressed by it and blown away, and then coming out of the movie theater and being young, smokers, lighting up our cigarettes and not even talking about the movie, just kind of like standing there, like that whole thing is a good memory. But I can't help but think about the movie. The most recent time I've seen it, or my most recent judgment of it, is the judgment I carry of the movie. It's not the first judgment. I mean, maybe that's just me, but it's like
I guess.
Sometimes I worry, like if something I've read as a child, I worry about rereading it because I want to hold it in that little, sacred spot that it has. And I'm like, oh man, if I read it and it's full of problematic stuff and it'll be bothersome for me because I didn't recognize that when I was young. But there's no way to not see it now. Supposing you've got sexist depictions, supposing you've got racist depictions, you've got like weird humor and jokes at the, at the cost of people. Like as a kid, I may not have registered these, and I certainly wasn't aware of these things in the same way. And I thought it was a great comic. But what if I read it today? Will it ruin my childhood? There's always that fear. And so sometimes you're like, better not to open that can of worms and just leave that be and say, I enjoyed that when I was a kid. I'm never going back to look at it again to see if it holds up.
But then going back to your point earlier about how like a book can impact you differently at what point in life that you're in, kind of thing. You could read a book when you're really young and be naive to what's going on and just really enjoy it. And then you might read the book, right after coming out of university and be like, oh, I'm going to critique these things and I'm going to be against this and I'm going to be against that. And I'm going to, be really offended by this for these people and for those people and so on and so forth. And then you might read it again as like an old man, you've softened and you're actually more open to being like, you know what, it was a thing of its time. I'm going to enjoy it for what it is and really enjoy it. So that actually is an argument for multiple rereads at different stages in your life so that you can experience it.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. I think, and to Blackpole's point earlier, as we grow older and hopefully wiser, as you were saying, we get more nuance, we get more subtlety, we get more shades, and we say, it can be good in these ways, and it can be not so good in these ways. And it's fine for both of them. They can coexist. It doesn't have to be mutually exclusive. Either it's this or it's that. It can be both at the same time. But when we were children, maybe things were perfect, and to add nuance to that is fine. You're being very smart and you're looking at it, from a softened, hardened, clever, etc. But you're still getting rid of perfection, somewhere. And then you're just like, no, I won't reread it. So that's one of the dangers that I think is that you can take something that is perfect. And of course, it can't actually be perfect. We know that. We know that about the world, that nothing is perfect. But because we have that idea of perfection, somewhere rooted in that thing, like it was a perfect experience, it was a perfect feeling and a perfect emotion, or at the very least have crafted into a memory of perfection. Now I want to hold on to that, even though I know it might not be true. It's kind of like having a little superstition or believing in Santa Claus or something like that. It's having that one corner that you don't touch. But I think the other thing that I was wondering about is that there is a certain kind of fanaticism, whether we think about it as fanboy stuff or whether we think about it as a certain kind of tribal, almost cultish sort of things. And some of it comes from a certain like single-mindedness of like this one book or this one author, and I don't necessarily mean it only in comics, but it can be, but it's there. I mean, in religion, it's like people only read this one religious book and nothing else, and just read it over and over and over again. Reading one book or making everything about one book or one set of books, I think there is a real danger, because there is this, like, no, don't make any one book, no matter which book it is. Never make any one book the most perfect thing in the world. Read just lots and lots of books, enjoy lots of different kinds of books. And it's like, so when people are like, I'm only going to read science fiction, I'm only going to read hard science fiction, and I'm only going to read hard science fiction from this period of time, and this is this is my belief system, I feel sometimes a little weirded out by it, just the way that I feel a little weirded out by people who only read Harry Potter, or the people who only read Ayn Rand, or only read self-help gurus, or only read Chicken Soup for the Soul and all of that kind of stuff. It's like that exclusivity. Sometimes I think that rereading can disguise a certain sort of cultish, worshipy sort of behavior, which I find to be perhaps intellectually unhealthy in certain ways, or doors to a certain kind of closed-mindedness or a certain kind of fanaticism, which I worry about, especially with, internet culture being what it is. There's something to be said for keeping yourself reading as diverse an ocean and not just wallowing in the same few things over and over again, and exposing yourself to new things and not getting too much in your comfort zone to say, I can't take anything other than, my good old Marvel DC superheroes, and only in the way that they were when I was 15, which is, just one of the many things that we see. Otherwise, it can be Star Wars or it can be Star Trek, whatever. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's a gatekeeper syndrome, right? Like, oh, you're not a science fiction fan unless you've read Bradbury and Simek and Larry Nevin, and anything outside of that, you're just wrong. Like all the new stuff, Andy Weir, all that stuff, that's science fiction, but you're not a real fan if you haven't read this little defined box that I consider. And so I think it's an interesting point, because I think that, there's a real issue anyways for me with people who are the gatekeepers, and my mind wants to go there all the time when I see, the big, in the speculative fiction, in the prose area, and the speculative fiction sales right now, the number one sale isn't science fiction. It's not fantasy. It's romantasy. It's this blend of romance and fantasy. And I'll see people online saying, well, that's not real science fiction. And it's like, well, we don't need to be the gatekeepers. To your point, can we read a little more broadly? And there's also this interesting part of like, how do you feed when you've got all the energy around? All I do want to read is read hard science fiction right now. And so that's what I'm feeding myself, and that's what keeps me going. And also recognizing that I should read some other stuff at some point when that energy starts to kind of fade a little bit now.
Yeah, I don't think, maybe genre is not the right example. I think about it more as specific works or specific books, like I'd rather read Twilight for the 500th time than some,
I mean, if you reread to the point of like exclusivity, then I can see how that becomes.
That's what I mean.
A kind of downside. But for me, like, I kind of split the experience from the story a little bit. So I still have that perfect experience of that first read, but I don't remember the ins and outs of the story. So even having a 90% experience in future, but getting to recap that story is worth it.
Yeah. Well, yes, because you're a healthy, functional person.
At least one of us on here is.
Well, 1 out of 3 ain't bad. but sometimes I wonder if that level of obsessiveness, is dangerous. I mean, I love fandom in some ways, and I love scholarship, and you never get to. But even in academia, I find people who are just like, oh, I'm going to read this and this alone, and that's all I'm going to read. And everything I read is going to be about this. And there's something about that whether it becomes gatekeepy, whether it becomes that sort of, well, actually sort of thing. But more than that is this notion that there is nothing greater than Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes stories. I'm just like, I'm a fan, but let's not get carried away.
Yeah.
There
I mean,
is-
I've never understood the idea of like, I mean, talking about comic books, I never understood the idea of a group of people or one person kind of promoting like, this is the best book and this is the book that you should constantly kind of like reread. Because for me, the book is only half of the experience. You're the other half of the experience. And every different person is going to take a book slightly differently.
Yeah.
So although it could have been, in theory, the best work of literature, it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm the person that's going to experience that as the best thing for me. So it might hit 90 people, but the other 10% might actually think it's lukewarm, just depending on how they are as a person.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we carry so much. It's interesting because this is going to be a divergent sidetrack, but it's so interesting because we carry so much baggage with us. And I mean, baggage in a somewhat good way. We've got hereditary baggage. We've got evolutionary baggage. We got cultural baggage, all these things that shape how we view works. So of course it's going to resonate differently with each one of us. And then I think back to even, I mean, it's not as big in comics as it is in some of the science fiction prose, but this idea of like, the 60s and 70s and reading these guys like Larry Niven and Robert Silverberg. And now you read them after coming through like the Me Too movement and a lot of the diversity initiatives and stuff like that. And it's like, oh, they're just cringeworthy now. They're still good stories, but they're in their time and they're set in their time. Right. And so they're going to resonate differently for each of us based on where, how we grew up, where we grew up, what's below our conscious level. Yeah, like I said, that total side tangent, but
yeah, but I mean, each person's experience is individual, so
yeah.
It's going to be different things that stand out, and as we mentioned before, also stand out at different points in your life. So you could read a book, kind of like I've bought CDs and hated an album, and then like several years down the line, listened to the album and thought it was great.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, a side question on this prompt. I was thinking about this morning, like, do you guys read single issues or arcs from single issues, or do you tend to pass those up and read collected editions? Highland G, I'll start with you.
As far as rereads are concerned, or just in general?
As far as rereads are concerned, yeah. Because my single issues, and I'll just prompt it with, my single issues, basically read them, bagged and board it into the box. And I very rarely go back and reread single issues. And especially because if it's something that's, a 5 out of 5 for me, I'm probably going to pick it up in a collected edition at some point. So I rarely read single issue comics again, and it's normally collected edition stuff.
It probably would depend more on I guess, like, I don't know how to say it, like again, that kind of like rarity or like where you're at in something. Like if there's an issue of a book coming out every single week, then I'm probably just going to read through that in singles once, and then any further rereads are going to be in some sort of collected edition. But if a single issue is coming out like once every 2-3 months, once a year, then I'm probably going to reread that single issue, if nothing else, to recap before reading the next one.
Okay. Yeah.
So there's been a few, independent issues or things I picked up recently from from Kevin Wells and from Angstrom and so on and so forth that I've read several times as single issues, because all I have is 2 issues of Angstrom's book, so I'm going to read it a few times.
I think that's a prompt that you need to put out more.
Yeah, we're working on it. But yeah, no.
But it also shows I enjoy it,
Yeah.
Oh, I'm very glad to hear that. But also, I think in particular, well, talking about our comic is one thing, but in general, there are things that are sort of, you discover more when you reread them. And in particular, like the approach that we took for that comic was that there is no narrative, there's no narration boxes, there's no narrator telling you anything else. It's all dialogue and scenes. So in some ways, it's like, you may not get everything in the first go. You might need to read it a couple of times just to say, okay, this is what they were referring to, or this is what's going on. And it creates a nice kind of thing, because chapterized stories are fun. Like you used to watch one episode of something, and then you would have to wait a week to see the next episode, and you'd get to chat with your friends about it, whether on discussion boards or around that famed water cooler in the office or what have you. And that act of thinking about it and wallowing in it for a while, and talking about it is fun. And I think if I had been in that culture, I would see the appeal of that, of getting the single issue and then sort of wallowing in it and ruminating while you wait for the next single issue to come out. And that's the rereading that you do with the single issue as you wait for the next issue. That's when the rereading takes place. Of course, for me, it's the other way around. I live in a place in which single issues don't become available very easily. And even if they do, they certainly don't become available on the day and date of release. They'll become available many months or years later somehow and arbitrarily. So for me, buying single issues has been sort of backward from the way it is for most of you, which is I would have read Bone in the Scholastic Color editions, said this is a great series, then found out that, it was originally published in black and white in 55 single issues, and then gone on a hunt for those single issues. And that extends to even things like New Frontier. Is like I read it first as a trade paperback, and then I was like, I want to get the single issues. Or Watchmen, which I read first as a trade paperback, and I was like, I wonder like how reading these chapters and pretending I had to wait for months, and this chapter is where they're introduced, and this chapter is absent friends and them at the graveyard, and this chapter is Rorschach's backstory, and this chapter is them on Mars. Like how these individual things function. Like when I read it as a trade paperback, I'm just reading it as a novel. But then these original readers of it, they had to wait months in between. And each of these is like a little novella in itself. And how do I get that flavor? So I try to put myself into the shoes of people, even when I'm buying old Fantagraphics and, like Zero and anthology magazines and stuff like that, is I'm always trying to do some sort of time travel and space travel. Like, what if I was going into an LCS in the mid-90s? What if I saw Daniel Klaus's 8-Ball on the shelves, or these Love and Rocket stories on the shelf, one issue at a time? So for me, the single issue rereading is usually coming after the trade paperback rereading, and the single issue rereading is coming to say that, I want a different experience, and I want to try to transport myself or transplant myself into a different experience. So that's kind of a very different thing, I think, than what you're talking about, Blackpool.
But it plays, and at the same time, it plays into this idea that we talked about a little earlier about it can be based on culture. Right? How we reread, how we do it can be based on culture. Your culture's set up a little differently. Some of it's out of our control on what opportunities we have. I just want to give a shout out. Gore Vidal's in the chat, so I just want to say hi to Gore.
Hello, Gore.
Yeah, he speaking of rereads, a number of years ago, Gore, I couldn't find Clifford Simak's book City. And out of an act of kindness, he found it in one of his used bookstores and sent it up to me. And that was one of my rereads this year was actually City. So that copy is dear to me because it came as a gift from Gore, and it's been read multiple times now. So it's apropos that he's here today. Yeah. Do you want to? Let's move on to the next prompt. Unless you got something else, Highland G.
I had a couple of things I wanted to kind of mention just kind of quickly. One was you kind of touched on the kind of cultural kind of differences. Like I also noticed that when I'm reading like maybe the first couple of single issues of a new book, and it is something that's like culturally different. So like when I first got into like samurai books or something like that has like a completely different style, the worlds, the outfits, all those kind of things. Like I'll reread those things because I'm paying attention to those like little details. So like a funny little thing with Angshan's book that I got really obsessed with is the guy's scarf that he wears like over his kind of chest and kind of wrapped around his arm, because like I don't culturally understand like why he wears that or what that kind of like like kind of works as, but because of that I would then go back and reread the book just to follow where the scarf's going throughout the story, like even like ignoring the actual story itself. And I don't know if you had anybody else mention that as a non sort of like Indian reader, but like that was something that really stood out to me as something different in your book and a reason to kind of go back through it. But I also kind of just wanted to, I guess, put the question out there a little bit, is like not maybe single issues, but if you do have like a collected edition that has like a specific like arc or something that you enjoy, would you open the book and just read that specific arc because that was the arc you enjoyed, rather than reading the entire hardcover?
My answer will be hopefully short. No. I got that completionist thing where like if I'm going to read like that arc, I'm going to start at the beginning of the trade and go through. It's always been one of my struggles with some of the bigger books that I really love for rereads. Like I really want to read Strangers in Paradise again, but it's a commitment, right? You're looking at 2,000 pages of a great, wonderful work, one of my favorite works of all time, but it's a big commitment. And so I don't personally feel it's right to just pick up in the middle of the arc, even though I can do it if I wanted to. There's something in my brain that's just like, nope, you got to start at the beginning and you got to go. I shouldn't say I have to go to the end. I'm okay with not finishing books, but if I'm going to reread something, I'm pretty much going to go from beginning to end.
Yeah, I was just wondering because like Angstrom has mentioned in the past that he really enjoyed the Starfire specific issue from New Teen Towns. And like I've got that in an omnibus. And I really enjoy that issue as well. And there's been times where I've just went and read that issue, like even though it's in a larger collected edition.
Yeah, I think it really depends on the stories, right? Because when we are looking at things like movies, there is this whole thing about you're flipping channels and some movies on, and oh, it's the Shawshank Redemption. I'll watch 10 minutes of it, and then you just sit and you watch the rest of it. Even though you started in the middle, you're still gonna get to the end. But that's because that's one of the classic examples. Because whoever turns off the Shawshank Redemption? But the idea being that is one unified story. Whereas with things that are episodic, things that do have a variety of stories in there. First of all, I'm not much of a omnibus guy. I like slim hardcovers. I like books that have their own identity. And I think I've always been that way. Even as a lit student, you had that collected works of Shakespeare that you bought for the class, and it was just like such tiny font and thin, tissue paper, etc. I prefer Hamlet as a special, as a separate book, and Macbeth as a separate book, and Romeo and Juliet as a separate book, and you can just read that book. And I'm a big fan of having books on my shelves in that form. But even in larger things, Usagi Yojimbo being the easiest example I can think of, is that I can very easily go in and read 1 or 2 issues of Usagi, depending on what I'm looking for, the 2-3-parter Daisho, or like there's so many like single standalone issues, like The Pretty Girl is Like a Malady, Wolfman Perez story you mentioned, Highland G. There are so many standalone stories. And even in my recent reading, when I was reading The Fantastic Four by Ryan North, or the beginning of Al Ewing's Immortal Hulk, there's such a nice episodic standalone story feel to them that I can quite see myself reading a particular story that I am interested in and not rereading the entire thing. But if it was something like Watchmen, for example, something that is one long novelistic work, I think that would be not something I would want to, unless I was, I wanted to find a reference for an argument that I was having online or something like that. That's a different matter. But if it is a full story that requires you to read it from beginning to end, I find it very difficult to only read part of it. But if it is a collection of Uncle Scrooge stories, I can very easily pick out that collection, find that particular Uncle Scrooge story I'm thinking of, and read that and only that. Although it's probably likely I'll continue after that story's over as well.
Yeah, good question. Yeah, there's a comment from, both from Gore and from Ritwiki. Let's see what we can...
Yeah, the self-contained short stories that Ritwik is talking about.
Yeah, reading single issues.
So that's the kind of like idea I was kind of getting at, like just because it's been put in a bigger book, you're still going to, in some cases, have individual stories, So does the bigger book make you have to, see it as one entity, or can you just go and approach the one kind of thing that interests you?
I mean, I've heard people say things like, "Oh, I went and read the grape scene at the end of Why the Last Man, yesterday to just, I was just like, okay, I get it. I mean, I don't want to disparage that, but I don't ever do that, where you go read a particular sequence or a thing. It's like watching clips of movies on YouTube, I suppose. Like there are some things that are supercuts of action scenes, and to me, that doesn't make any sense. But I've rewatched Mad Max Fury Road many, many times just because I want to see those action scenes again. But I have to watch it beginning to end. I can't watch it out of context. As a reread or as a rewatch, I think it works that way. For a longer story, one section of it is not something I'm very easily, I can't easily extract one little section for a read.
Oh, it's interesting.
This is about reading continuously and having to wait. I mean, can you imagine? It's like those. It's like the worst seasons of The Walking Dead, where something happens and then you go away for 2 episodes and you're with another group of people and you're just like, I don't care about these people. Go back to what they were doing.
Yeah. Move on to the next prompt.
Yeah.
Here we go. The big one. One of the big ones.
Yeah,
so this can be
like one.
The challenges that we face from what keeps us from rereading more. And we could also maybe talk about how we overcome those challenges or how we deal with them, how we personally like try to overcome whatever obstacles are in our way from rereading more. So for the love of comics, I think you're up this time. We'll start with you. What keeps you from doing more rereading?
Well, I mean, there are good things and bad things. There's the stuff that keeps you from doing more reading in general, keeps you from rereading, because rereading is, a subset of reading. So, I've got work and I've got other stuff to take care of and I'm tired and I'm busy and I got a headache and I'd rather watch TV or play video games. There's all of that stuff. But I think those are things that's just about making time for reading and allowing yourself to be slower and allowing yourself to be less, dopamine addicted, which is an uphill task for all of us in some ways. But specifically, I think what keeps me from rereading would be the good thing is like there's more new stuff to read and there's all the stuff that I bought and there's this haul from this Amazon sale and I was at Thought Bubble last week and I was at Comic-Con this last weekend, and so things keep piling up. And it is an interesting thing for me where it seems very similar. I think Highland G, you were saying this right at the top of the live stream. It seems very similar to that idea that when I was young, I had all this time and no money. And then you get older and you've got a little bit of money and you don't have time, And so it's just like, here you are. And it was even me as a college student. I never had a video game system when I was young. And as a college student, my roommate had a video game system. But he and I could only afford like one game at a time every now and then. So it was, you'd swap games and maybe rent games or stuff like that. But it's like later when you can get more games, and especially with Steam and all these sales, you end up with all these games that you've purchased at like 99 cents and $2. And you're like, when am I going to get to play them? So it's similar to that in some ways. I think what keeps me from rereading more is there's always this new stuff to read. And there is a sort of guilt that I haven't gotten to this yet. What am I doing going back to that? Yeah. But I had a professor once who said, why should I go out and drive to the movie theater to watch a new movie that I'm probably going to hate when I could just stay at home and watch The Wild Bunch again? And it was a great point. Like, I get it. I absolutely get it. There is this kind of like, I know this is good and I know it will continue to be good. Even on my 3rd and 4th revisitation, why should I chance something that's probably going to let me down and be disappointing when I know I have, like a prime cut just waiting for me to sink my teeth into it again? So it's always that kind of push and pull. But I think it's usually a good thing that, oh, I got more new stuff to read. And that's what's keeping me from rereading. But as we were talking about earlier, I think I do get to reread because I give it such high value. Most of my rereads have become closer to my initial read. So I'll read something and I'll probably reread it. Especially if I really enjoyed it, I will probably reread it again within the next couple of months, because it'll be something that I'll want to get a check on to say that, look, did I really enjoy it? I'll let it sink in a little bit, but then I want to talk about it, and I want to know, I want to know what I'm talking about. I don't want to talk out of my butt. So I'll reread it again to make sure that I was right in what I wanted to say about it or what I feel about it. So that's a thing that I've really enjoyed, reading something, enjoying it, thinking back about it, and then reading it one more time before you get online to talk about it or to chat about it with a friend of yours.
Oh, that's interesting. I'm the opposite on that way. Where like I want to give it a bunch of space. I do my reading, and I don't want to pick it up again. And I want to give it space and read a bunch of stuff, and then it gets lost in the shuffle often. So
yeah,
that's, for me, that's a good thing, because it might be like the next time that comes up is like, oh, I'm going to set this on the table and make sure that in the next couple of months I actually go back and reread it and try that approach and just see how that works for me. So instead of being fixed in my own ways. And you hit on what, Gore said too. The challenges are unread books, right?
Yeah.
Like part of what keeps me from rereading is just the number I've got here. And there's an Italian philosopher that was talking about that. Like the most important book on your bookshelf is the one that you haven't read. This idea that we haven't explored those ideas yet. And yet we just got done for 90 minutes talking about how important rereading is for all the different reasons. And yet we've got all these things that keep us from actually rereading. And outside of, like you mentioned, work and video games and movies and all the stuff, just our, whatever our reading time is going to be. So I guess, over to Highland G, what keeps you from doing more of the rereads?
Yeah, I would agree with a lot of kind of what's been said. I think there's an element of that kind of potential worry of something that's new not necessarily being as kind of good. But I also think there's a bit of a kind of balance between, like, I had to kind of say it, but like, I just totally blanked what I was saying. Yeah. So what were you were just kind of saying that, like,
So for the what stands in your way, I guess, from your rereading, like you got a specific amount of reading time per week or whatever. Mm-hmm. Is it the FOMO? Is it kind of like this fear of missing out on what everybody's onto on the next thing, because comics are so serial and they're constantly coming out? Is it because of the number of books that you have on your shelf that are unread? Is it, what really kind of taps in? Why don't we, and I think this is a question, like, general and for most of society, why don't we reread books? Why are we always on to having to find the next thing and not taking in the good that we've already found to a certain extent?
Yes. I mean, I think it's a bit of a balance between, like, reading something once, I don't feel is the complete full experience. So if you read a lot of things once, you're not necessarily taking it in fully. So although you are experiencing more things, you're not necessarily having the full experience. So there's that balance between, do you want to experience a lot of things a little, or do you want to experience a few things fully? I guess a bit. And then the other side of things is just the sheer amount of choice. If I've got, 200 books on my shelf, I could spend more time trying to decide which book I'm going to read than actually reading.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and
like,
also
so
the more books you put on your shelves and the more books you have, like, it's actually unfeasible. I think that's a very good point about the paralysis of numbers, because if I was to reread I'm going to be dead before I reread everything that's in my house, let alone stuff that's not in my house. So after a point of time, it's really about, like, why do you even have these on your shelves? That's the real question. It's just like, shouldn't you just be like done with it and move it on? Like, what are you talking about? If I started up here and went one book by one book, it will be years, decades maybe before I'm done rereading everything in this room and those other rooms and on those things, etc., etc. And I'm sure that's the case for so many of us. And yeah, absolutely. That's a great point about like, yeah, what keeps us from rereading is where does it stop then? And then when will you ever get to actual reading? Because you could spend the rest of your life rereading. I mean, it's not an exaggeration. And that idea is kind of ridiculous, right? Because you're like, I'm not going to spend the rest of my life rereading. I want to read new stuff.
And even if you do reread, what do you reread? What do you prioritize? Which book do you reread? When do you reread it? Like if you've got 100 books to reread, which one gets the priority?
Yeah. I think it's actually completely arbitrary. I think most people want to think like there's a system or there's a plan. And I was like, nope, it's just like it's like buying stuff. Like I have a wish list, and then suddenly something will come out of nowhere right on top and be the next book you bought. You're like, what was the point of the wish list, man? And it's the same kind of thing with. So I think, again, getting back to what I was talking about earlier, one thing I found is make a video on it. That will make you reread it. It'll just like, it's like, oh, I want to talk about Will Eisner. So I think that happened to me a long time ago with like me. I was just wondering, what video am I going to make for my next video? And I was like, I haven't read Contract with God since I first read it. I bought it, I read it, and like maybe I've read it twice, but I was like, oh, I'd like to reread that again. I'll make a video on Will Eisner, and that will force me to reread it, or I'll reread it because of that. So I think giving yourself little, like if you had a blog or if you're writing reviews, you were making top 10 lists, any of those kind of things would give you a reason to reread and will give you a system of picking what it is that you're rereading. So one of the things I have in mind is, if I was to make a top 10 autobiographical comics list, it's like I have titles in my mind that I think make the list, but I've only read them like over a decade ago. So I can't just make a list and put them on there. I will have to reread them to see if they deserve to be on the list I make today. So it's kind of giving myself an assignment that allows me that luxury of rereading that I think might work for us. So a little better than the arbitrary nature of like, what do I pick from my shelves?
No, go ahead.
So I was just going to say, I also kind of try to, I guess, prompt myself a little bit. So I have like Kallax shelves where it's all kind of cubes, and like I'll set one cube as my like what I would like to read kind of section of books, and some of that'll be new books and some of that'll be books that I want to kind of reread. And I find that much easier when I come to being like, okay, I've got some time to read, because now I'm only deciding from one cube. I'm not deciding from an entire bookshelf.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think part of what For Love Comics talking about, and so the word that we came back to before too with rereading, there's got to be some intentionality there, right? We've talked about that. Like, how do we make rereading a priority? How do we really set an intention to actually do the rereads and not just move on to the next thing all the time? And so one of the things I do is, I don't know if you guys are familiar with StoryGraph. It's it's an alternative to Goodreads, which is but way better in my opinion. There's less of the social stuff, and it's more about actually the books and your reading habits. And one of the things you can do is you can go and you can create a challenge out there, and then if you want to, you can make it public so other people can join it. So like one of the challenges out there is, in sci-fi, it's all the Nebula winners ever. One of them is all the Hugo winners. So one of them that I create every year for myself is to reread one book each quarter. And then once you reread it, you see your little graph update that tells you what percentage you're at throughout the year and stuff like that. But I try to bake in some intentionality into my reading plans so that there's a little bit of accountability. Even if it's just a false sense of accountability, my mind still looks at it and goes, oh, I really got to do that, even though it's just self-imposed, right? And so that's one of the ways that I try to keep rereading kind of front and center and having some of that intentionality. Because like you guys said, my thing, LNG, like that idea of the calyx, that one
Mhm.
shelf would turn into, within 6 months, it would be 8 of them, that there'd be all these books stacked up there that I'd want to read. I have a TBR list that I started in like maybe June of like, okay, this is what I want to finish reading this year. And it started with like 4 or 5 books. And I think it's up to like 35 or 40 at this point, because I just keep adding more in and then slotting them in different spots. And like for Love of Comics said, like we hear something and all of a sudden, oh, that moves to the top of what I want to read next. And so coming up with, I don't like to schedule a lot. I don't like to do a lot of scheduling, but I think sometimes, especially for me with rereading, it really helps to force me to reread stuff and not have to just move on to what the next thing is.
Yeah, I mean, I think
I
I was
Sorry,
going
go
to say that there's a little bit to do with like, I guess like you were saying, like kind of like prompting yourself, but I also feel like there's a little bit of like having intention in the kind of control of that. So like not letting it go beyond that. So like for me, if I've got that one cube, I can't add another book until I've read something in that cube because there's no space. The second cube can't exist because there is only one cube.
Again, you got a normal person here. One of the things is normal that would actually abide by these laws.
And that doesn't say that doesn't mean to say that
that sounded normal to you, did it?
That doesn't
Like,
mean to say
only
that
one
there
cube. You can have no more than one cube.
That doesn't mean to say that there aren't other books that I've bought, and read straight away as they've come in. And that doesn't mean to say that there are not books that are sitting waiting to be read after I've kind of got through, what's kind of in that cube. But if I kind of set myself to that and there's 10 books on that kind of cube and I read one of them, then I can add another book in and that could essentially skip the other 9. But I'm keeping it a somewhat controlled environment while still giving myself choice.
Yeah. Discipline.
Yeah. One of the things that I've seen, and Gore Vidal mentioned something about being a mood reader, thinking about a story or an image, etc. And I think that definitely rings true for me. Sometimes it'll be about a mood or a feel, and it's definitely happened with like a palate cleanser type of situation sometimes, where I read something and I'm like, man, that wasn't a good crime story. Let me read one of those good crime stories that I know are good crime stories. It's like this is what it could be. And sometimes when you have a disappointment, or sometimes you're just in a, you're in a certain zone and you think about something like a piece of music, like a perfect complement to the zone you're in. And that I think can be the kind of thing that Gore Vidal is talking about.
We want to feed that. I think we want to feed that as far as.
I was like, what's going on? Aren't you asleep?
We want to feed that mood reading, though, to a certain extent. At least I do, because that's where my mind and my interests are at that point, right? Like, oh, this is what the mind really kind of wants. This kind of mood, this kind of setting, and that when I feed that, it keeps that energy alive. I don't get into reading slumps because I'm willing to adjust and do that. So there's that balance between somewhat of it being a disciplinarian and saying, no, I've only got that one cube. And also, like, how do I keep the momentum of what's really interesting to me right now? What really do I feel like is going to feed me? It's a individual choice, obviously.
Yeah.
But I think it's a great point that he brings up,
Well, I think that for me is why, like, I would keep the whole kind of cube, like, as opposed to being like, okay, I'm going to take this one book and I'm going to put it on my bedside table, and this is definitely the next book I'm reading, and I'm forcing myself to read this book next. I'd rather have the 10 books so that if I'm not in the mood for that particular book, I can pick up one of the other ones, but I'm still somewhat within a controlled environment. And as I say, it doesn't mean that I'm not going to buy something and skip the whole thing. It's just that it at least sets the intention, as we've kind of mentioned a few times, that I want to reread that specific book in the near future.
Yeah, and technically, the Calyx cubes, one of the Calyx cubes is really a 4x4. So there's really 8 cubes within the one cube.
Oh, no. Spreading.
I mean, if you go by that, my whole shelf's a cube. It's a 5x5.
Yeah. And my house is kind of a cube. So anything in the house is actually fair game. That's good.
Do you have another prompt for us, Matthew?
Yeah, there's a couple more, I think. We kind of touched on this already, I think, to a certain extent, but and I was thinking when I came up with this prompt, I was just thinking of like, oh, the guy that I talked about earlier, where I'd recommended Gotham Central to him, And then all of a sudden he was posting images of it and talking about how great it was. And he had, tagged me in a couple of posts, and it got me jacked up to go back and reread it. So I've been trying to pay attention to, like, I'm reading a book and I'm in the middle of it and I go, oh, it's something, it's a new book I'm reading and something resonates, and it goes, oh, I want to go read Lemir's Royal City. And so then, sometimes I get those prompts. So I'm just curious, like, what, is there anything specific that causes you want to do a reread outside of just like the mood or walk up on the shelves? And then maybe even on top of that, which one of those things that causes you actually has you go and do the reread? Because I often think about, oh yeah, I want to reread Black Hammer, and oh yeah, I want to reread Royal City, whatever it might be. And those will go through my mind throughout the day. But which one actually sticks and I actually go and decide to actually do the reread is very minimal percentage-wise compared to all the books I think about rereading. Yeah. Island G, we'll start with you this time.
I mean, again, it's probably a little bit the circumstance, a little bit the intention. So like there could be things like, for instance, if I've just upgraded a book to a hardcover from being like trade paperbacks or something like that, I kind of in my head feel that I want to read that new edition, because otherwise why did I buy it?
Interesting. Yeah. So
that in itself would drive me to reread the story, although it's a physically new book. Because, well, I just got it in. It's new, but at the same time, I've also paid to upgrade something. And why would I pay to upgrade something if I'm not going to re-experience it? It's then just an object on my kind of shelf. But there could also be like a specific intention from it. As I mentioned a little bit earlier, like I've been trying to read books that are in German, and I've only got so many of them, and I want to kind of keep that up a little bit. I'm still rubbish at reading German, but the reason that I am rereading it is to kind of make it more of a daily or monthly kind of practice of reading that language. So I'll come back and reread those books because I have the intention of trying to hopefully at some point fluently read German. So, there can be specific reasons that you're kind of driving yourself to go back to specific things.
Yeah. For the love of comics?
Well, I think a couple of these things we've already talked about, but there will be a couple of specific things like that have to do with YouTube, for example, for people like us, where someone will put a comment and they'll say, well, what I really liked about this was blah, 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 and over there. And then you're just like, oh, I don't know if I remember that, or I don't know if I noticed that, or I don't know if I thought about it the same way. And then, or there'll be like this outright like rejection. You're like, wait, that wasn't the way it went down, or that's not the interpretation. Let me go check on that. So there's almost like a reactive rereading. That's one thing. But very recently, I was on Earl Gray's channel talking about our favorite Jason comics. And for that, I reread as many Jason stories as I could cram in before that conversation, just to make sure that I was prepared. So I think when we have conversations, for example, if we were doing something on recent reads, that's one thing. But if we were doing our favorite action sequences, so whenever I'm talking with somebody else, whether it's in the comments, whether it's in a live stream that I'm going to attend on their channel, or a list that I'm going to contribute to, people have invited me and I want to be prepared. I think that's one of those things that I can think of as an impetus to do a reread that I really enjoy. It's not, I mean, I was reading what Gore was saying about homework, and I completely agree with him that I never assign myself stuff if I feel it's going to disinterest me just because I've created an assignment out of it. At the same time, I love games. So there's like this boundary between like giving yourself an assignment and setting yourself up with a game. And sometimes I think, if someone has, someone asked me to write a little article for their magazine recommending 5 comics about X. So I did a lot of rereading just to make sure that my recommendations were truly the top of, it's the same kind of thing. So needing to make a top 5 or a top 10 list, getting onto someone else's channel to chatting. Hello, Sleepy Reader. These are things that I found extremely healthy about the YouTube environment, which makes for that like wanting to be prepared for a conversation, wanting to know what you're talking about, and wanting to make sure you're not just faffing around, and giving a conversation and a dialogue the respect it deserves. I think that's a great impetus for me to reread and make sure that my footing is as strong as I can make it.
Yeah, I like that. So part of it is that, again, it's that part of that's an intentionality of like putting yourself in spots that are going to force you to kind of do some rereading, force you to re-engage with those works, and the
without
importance
it
of
sounding like homework.
completely. Yeah. Because, you know, as Gore said, then later on, this idea that, we want to, we read for fun, right? We read for enjoyment. A lot of us do anyways. A lot of the time we read because we want to learn something, but having intentionality around there, putting ourselves where we got to do it, whether it's a book club, reading such a, you know, it's not like we sit or I will sometimes go to a friend's house and we'll drink coffee all day and just be quiet and read. We'll be in the same room reading, but for the most part, we're doing it on our own. So figuring out how we can engage with others with some of these books in a intelligent way to a certain extent, right? When you want to be able to come across with having a good foundation of the story.
Yeah.
I mean, even as a viewer of YouTube, if I know that like one of you guys was to gonna, do a live stream on a specific book or something coming up soon, and I have that book, then I'm probably gonna read it not as homework, but because I want to be refreshed on that book before I see what your opinion on that book is.
Yeah. That's interesting. I think about that with like all the podcasts as back to Star Trek, all the podcasts as the new Star Trek seasons would roll out. And it's like everybody would watch an episode, and then the next day everybody's on the live stream talking with the people that are doing the podcast because they've seen it. And yet a lot of times we've read something a couple of years ago and then we go and we watch the video of it. So using that as like a hack, right? To like, this would be a good thing to reread. And I think that's a great idea. Great point for it.
Or like maybe you've completely forgotten about a book on your shelf somewhere, and then like you watch a chat that we're having and we're like, absolutely going right into and be like, oh, this book is amazing. We just read it recently and it's great. And they're like, oh yeah, I haven't read that in a while, but I've got it on my shelf. And then you go,
I know. Isn't that a shocking number of comments like that? Like sometimes I mean, I don't mean to sound superior, but sometimes I get really irritated when I see either on YouTube or on Instagram, like just these endless comments that say, oh, I picked that up 4 years ago and I haven't read. I mean, not to say that there isn't such something, but like everyone is responding saying that they have it, but they haven't read it yet, or they picked it up and they haven't read it yet. And that's when that's the
or even you
extent
read
of
it
the
once
conversation.
and just threw it on the shelf and forgot about it, and just don't even remember.
At least if you've read it once, okay. But
Yeah.
I'll let them off the hook. Them that have read it once. I think that when the conversation is only like I heard a lot about it and picked it up and never read it, I think that seems like a dead end conversation. This is like, why even comment?
That's like the type of I have nothing to say at this point. Just put that in. Yeah.
But just when you've got an abundance of books, you might really enjoy a lot of books, and therefore, you might just never be personally drawn to go and just go and reread that book. But because you saw somebody else talking about it and really sharing their enthusiasm for it, you're like, oh yeah, I really loved reading that book like 5 years ago, so what I'm going to do is go back and reread it now.
Yeah. And I think there is that argument aspect to it as well, although it generally is a little less. Most of it is about, oh, wow, they've got me excited about it. But sometimes it's like, I think you're wrong, and I'm going to have to reread it to make sure I know that you're wrong. Or, it's like, that's not the way it goes down. Or, I'm sure there's something over there that indicates this, So that idea of checking your memory because you're in an argument might also be one of those less noble reasons to do a reread.
Yeah.
Less noble. That's a good way of putting it.
Yeah.
I would say
we should accept the pettiness that resides within us.
Yeah. I think there's definitely there's that kind of like mood reading from like I'm just in the mood and I want to do this, and there's mood reading from I had some sort of reaction to somebody else, either
Yeah.
in a good or bad way.
Yeah. But I think they can kind of mix together to be the same thing. Who knows what a mood is being created from? It could be created from a song on the radio or a memory that, the dream brought you. I mean, they're all stimulus to us in some way that we're reacting to. So, I mean, I think it's interesting to try to. I like this question because it's trying to get us to identify some of these things that we may not otherwise think about, but encounter all the time. There's always some trigger. What trigger is it? Which one of these triggered which thing? I think is a great is a great thing to examine.
Yeah,
I mean,
I'm always.
the
No, go ahead, G.
I keep cutting you off. But I was going to say the other thing that I've been kind of known to do, especially if it's like relatively shorter books and there's kind of time between them, is I'll reread the previous volume when the next volume comes out as a kind of recap going into the next book.
Yeah, that's a great way to do rereads, right? When that kind of thing happens. And I do that more with shows where, like, okay, the first season's Severance is out and the second one's going to come out, so I'm going to rewatch one and before.
Especially because there are like 3 years between seasons these days. You have to do it because it's no longer 9 months or so.
My mind was in a bad spot yesterday because, like, they're talking 2027 for season 3 now. They haven't even started filming it yet. And so I was like, it's funny. We if you grew up when I grew up, you had like 20 plus episode seasons and they all started in September every year. It wasn't like you just skipped a year. And now we go to streaming and we get 10 episode seasons that come out every 2 or 3 years. Like, something's not right here. There's my tangent.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think, but to get us back, like Gore Vidal had mentioned his favorite comic Saga in the comments, and it's here in the comments that not only does he read Saga, but he rereads Saga for whatever reason he might be
cosplay Saga.
Wow, that's something I didn't know about. but that reminds me of certain things like where I mean, I enjoy Saga and I read Saga, but at a certain point of time, I stopped reading the trade paperbacks because I started enjoying the deluxe hardcover format and I would get 3 trades in one go. But once I'd done that, and I think I was in 5 trades, and once I'd gotten the second trade, I didn't get any more trades after that because I just waited for the deluxe edition. But that means that along with the hiatus that they take, and then I have to wait for 3 trades to complete for a deluxe to be created. Yeah, that is one of those things which it happened with the second, third, and it will happen with the 4th deluxe that will come out next year, is I'll have to reread the previous ones before I read that one. So that's for sure. And I think at a lesser scale and level, not for plot reasons, but just to get back into the world, that's kind of the way I've done with Shaolin Cowboy. As well, where it's not for the intricacy of the plot, but just to get back into the Shaolin Cowboy thing. Is like every time a new Shaolin Cowboy book comes out that I get, I kind of go through the previous ones, and they're luckily not that long to go through. But yes, it's exactly that same idea. Is before the new season, take a look at the previous seasons to refresh yourself into that zone.
Well, yeah, I think I noted, this is go back quite a while now, but when Blackpool and I used to do sort of review live streams, we were doing sort of Paper Girls, and I remember kind of mentioning at the time that I'd read volume 1 hardcover Paper Girls 3 times, because what happened was when the first one came out, I'd only ever read them in hardcover. So I read the first one by itself. And then when the second one came out, I read the first one and the second one. And when the third one came out, I read the first one, the second one, and the third one. So I'd actually, by the time I read the third one, I'd read the first one 3 times.
Yeah. And you probably remember that the best, right? Even though the third one was the most recent, proximity-wise, the most recent read. It's the same thing we were talking about at the beginning of the thing. And I think Gore Vidal has identified the person I was plagiarizing at the beginning of the live stream. It's Italo Calvino. So, I have high standards for theft. That what makes something a classic is the fact that it can be reread. That's honestly the way I look at art, is like, it's got to take that ability to be reread. And the fact that you have enjoyed it, even when you've read it 3 times, says something about the quality of the work for you.
Yeah, I think the books that I've reread the most, I should say, are obviously the ones that fall in my top 1 or 2, 3 books of all times, at least on the prose side. Comics is
Right.
a little different just because, like I said, I really like to go back through Strangers in Paradise, but it's a big commitment. But on the prose side, I mean, I'm thinking of Gabriel Garcia Marquez's 100 Years of Solitude. I've done that multiple times just because of how much is there and how much I enjoy it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting that you would say it because I think Usagi Yojimbo notwithstanding, or Hellboy maybe, there aren't a lot. As soon as I'm saying this, I'm finding exceptions. But like, long series that are huge things that aren't episodic, but usually that's the problem with prose is, well, rereading's a big commitment of time. Rewatching a movie, you rewatch a 2-hour movie, it's going to take you 2 hours. It's fixed in time. You know what that pocket of thing is. So it's much easier to do that. But a novel takes you a long time to read and takes you a long time to reread because now you're wallowing in it more and you're not zipping through it with that first reader agenda that we talked about. Comics are somewhere in the middle, it seems to me, that they're faster to read than prose is. And this is a thing that we had in our last conversation together. But they are in many ways faster to read. Intertextuality, man, that's where we get out of it. But the idea being that there will still be a commitment. There'll still be a commitment of time that is up to you, and it's not fixed absolutely the way a movie or a TV show or a song has a fixed amount of time to it. Now, part of that, as we were discussing earlier, allows us to mitigate the peaks and the valleys where the horror doesn't hit as viscerally because we get to modulate that time. But then it's also, that's the kind of commitment we're thinking about when we're thinking about rereads. So I think somewhere we know that, I can pick that up. That's a fast read. And that might egg us on to do a reread because we know it's not going to take us that much time. Or we'll say, I'm going on a long trip and I'm going to take one book with me. Let me take that thing that's dense and will take me all of my vacation to finish. So sometimes we may keep that in mind when deciding on a reread, alongside the things about familiarity and comfort that we've already talked about.
Yeah. Yeah. And Damien Subreader says, good point about the novels. As I age, I debate with myself what to spend my remaining reading time on. And
I know, man. Impending mortality, it ruins everything.
Yeah. And it's interesting because, I think there's arguments for both sides of it, right? Do I read something new or do I go back and reread what I know, knowing that at least I think this was a hot commodity that I know I resonated with at least once versus do I take a stab at something which may not resonate with me? And like you said, the commitment for me is the big one for novels is like, is it worth the reread? Do I want to invest that time in it? Yeah.
So but there is that dilemma of like ordering from a new place or ordering from a place that has a favorite thing of yours, or even in a restaurant that you go to. It's like, do I order that same thing on the menu that I've ordered a dozen times before, but I know it's good, or do I take a chance on something else that maybe might disappoint me? And that sort of choice, I think, permeates everything we do, including our rereads and reads.
To kind of delve slightly more into because we've kind of skirted over it a little bit, but like it's coming across that it's easier to reread something that is a shorter sort of self-contained thing than it is if it's a longer sort of saga that you're kind of getting into.
Yeah.
So I guess I would kind of pose the question a little bit as to what would cause you to reread the longer saga. Like if that is the one that is the hardest to kind of get yourself to do, what would actually get you to finally do it? So if that is Strangers in Paradise for you, what would get you to reread that?
I don't know because I haven't found it yet. It's somewhat of a short, pithy answer, but it's the truth. Like, I don't know. Nothing has motivated me yet to go back in. And, it's funny because I've got the deluxe, I got the omnibus, the hardcover omnibus, and a year or two ago. I ended up buying all the paperback ones too on top of it, just so I was like, oh,
Wow.
then I can take them camping, or I can take them other spots, and I haven't done it yet. Yeah, and I think part of it comes to, for me anyways, comes to that like that going back to that mood thing of feeding what really you need right now and what kick I've actually been on. So my favorite thing is Monsters has been on my radar right now. There's a bunch of other stuff that I want to get to, and I haven't. I'm more inclined to pick up something short. I'm more inclined to pick up something short to do my reread worth than I am to invest in the omnibus. Maybe part of what would help is maybe at some point, as For the Love of Comics mentioned, maybe all of us should read it together and then have a discussion around it. And that would force me to do a reread.
Topic for the next live stream is stream. No, I think that's a good question, but I think that we're always going to pick something shorter than something longer. And the older you get, the way that all of us elderly gents, although I'm loath to pull the younger Highland G into the orbit of these graying planets. But yeah, I think there's something in our heads. But at the same time, it doesn't necessarily stop us from trying something that is long and epic, or starting something for the first time that is long and epic. Right? I mean, like it's kind of unusual. So it's only that reread factor. But I think sometimes it becomes about how good it is. But it's the same things that affect everything else, because you're like, I only have so much time. I only have so much time left, to go in that direction. Like, should I spend, everything becomes this kind of capitalism oriented opportunity cost. If I'm not doing this, then I could be doing that. If I do that, then I'm not doing something else. It's always that sort of trade-off mentality. And somewhere I wonder if that's, is that really necessary? Is that really healthy? I mean, like, just read whatever you want to read, and you want to reread it again, just reread it again. I mean, like, why this fear? Of course, it's not a real fear, and we're not really being programmed by someone to do it. I just think it's interesting that we apply these kind of value and time value of money and all of these odd economic concepts to what is, at the end of the day, an arbitrary, for pleasure kind of things. It's almost like we're always trying to optimize everything, including leisure. And that, to me, is curious. I mean, I don't judge it because I participate in it wholeheartedly myself, but it is interesting to me to observe that why are we trying to put these systems into place when they're actually kind of arbitrary and it kind of doesn't matter. But I think we've covered a lot of different bases over here, like including the topic that we were talking about is like maybe just rereading and not exploring new things is also not that healthy. Keeping yourself in that one pool and keeping yourself in that one little area and not exposing yourself to anything new, thinking this is genius, but not knowing that it stood on the shoulders of something that came before, or people have taken this and done more with it, and just thinking this is the be all and the end all of achievement. Those things can be dangerous too. So yeah, I think it's an interesting thing that we do. But I think for a longer work, we made a joke, but I think a longer work means more people involved. It's like you make a project for yourselves. You say, hey, the three of us and Damien and Gore and everyone in the comments will get together and we will have a 4-part retrospective on Strangers in Paradise. Like we will talk about part 1, part 2, part 3, part 4 in 4 different live streams of 3 hours each. And then you're like, crap, I better get to that reread.
Well, and Gore said he was talking about wanting to revisit Strangers. My only concern is that Gore will have his lawyers drop some kind of wonky contract after he gets done.
Well, I mean, you had to bring up the cosplay, right? I mean, sometimes you just keep things on the DL.
His lawyers are the richest lawyers in the country because he uses them a lot.
Well, maybe not. Does he pay them? I have never seen a receipt.
That's a good point. Yeah. All right. Should we move on to the next prompt? I think this is the last major prompt, and then
all right. And I'm having a great time. I don't know how much longer my voice is going to keep up.
Okay. Well, do you only reread 5-star reads? That's the prompt. So we'll give your voice a little rest. Highland G, we'll start with you. Have you
Wait,
ever
I
read
have a
any,
lot to say.
you know, even 4 and 5-star, like anything like 3-star, do you actually consider rereading, or is it only the cream of the crop for the most part? Or, set aside the idea of the Paper Girls analogy where, volume 3 came out, so I'm gonna read 1 and 2. Series that you've read or individual one, collected that you've read, does it have to be the pinnacle, or are you willing to go down and read something that was maybe average or maybe just slightly above average?
Yeah, I mean, I guess, kind of given some context to begin with, I don't really rate that many things 5 stars, so that would really limit my rereading. Because for me to rate something 5 stars means there's no chance to improve it, and there's always a chance to improve something. That's just how I kind of think. So something needs to be pretty damn perfect to get rated five stars. So most of my rereads are going to be 3 to 4 stars, but I think a 3-star book is good. Like, I don't think that that's like mediocre. Like, for me, 3 is middle of the road. It's done everything it needed to do. It was enjoyable. It just wasn't spectacular. 4 is something went kind of above and beyond, and 5 would mean there's nothing you could do to improve it. So like 3s and 4s would be most of my rereads. Anything 2 and below is unlikely.
Okay.
Unless prompted by some sort of, reason.
Yeah, that's and I think it's a great way to do it too, is just like, what would be a 5-star for you? What would be a 4? So coaching our comments with that, and I'll go next. So for me, it's a little different. So my 5 stars are like, it's a must read and definitely something you should have on your shelves. 4 is it's a must read and you might consider owning it. 3 is I could recommend it to somebody. Probably don't want to own it, but it's worth a read. And then below that, is not worth even paying attention to. And so I'm thinking I do mainly some of the 5-star reads because, like I said, for me, they're the ones that I think they're definitely something that people should have on their shelves, and they're definitely something people should read. And so those ones get the bulk of my attention, but I have been surprised at the number of books that in my memory, I'm like, oh, I really want to reread that. And then I go back to Goodreads and I look at it, or I go back to Storygraph, and I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars. And that's even more interesting to me. Like, why do I want to reread it when I only gave it 3 stars? Something in there resonated and landed with me with it. And I don't do those as often as my top reads. Yeah, so that's just kind of where I land on it. What about you for Love Comics?
This is a good question, but in some ways, I'm going to take that pedantic sort of exit from here because I don't rate books on stars. I mean, the numerical rating or even a letter grade rating to me doesn't make sense because I'd much rather have like a write up about it, and it's a lot more like, oh, here's good stuff, here's bad stuff, and most of the time it's like good stuff. So but I can take the spirit of what you're saying.
Do you categorize them in any way?
Like great, brilliant, could have been masterpiece. Yeah, I tend to do it with language. Like to me, and everyone here should know this about me by now, is why would I use 5 symbols when I could use 500 words instead? This is always, it's just like I'd much rather like blah, blah, blah about the whole thing, with caveats.
So your star
systems,
are the number of like trillions. Oh, that's a 1 trillion 400
pages,
billion.
right? Like, it's like, did I write 5 pages on that? Did I write 4 pages on that? Although, it doesn't even work that way. Something that I dislike tremendously might get 20 pages from me on how much I disliked it and why I disliked it. So I really think about it from that point of view of discussion and everything. But abandoning the pedantic just for a moment, I'll be back. Don't worry, that's where I live. But keeping with the spirit of what you're saying, I think most of the time, yes, it is the great stuff and the wonderful stuff, the stuff that is ringing in my memory as a beautiful achievement in the art form and the medium, etc., that I revisit. However, there have often been books that aren't necessarily about, like we were talking about great stuff that you're not going to revisit, and what does that mean? Sometimes there have been things that are more interesting than enjoyable. And it's very similar to what you're saying. Is like, why is that it's stuck in my head?
Yeah.
Why am I still thinking about it, even though I thought I didn't have a great time. And I was recently talking about this with a friend of mine as well. It's just like, well, I watched that movie and I didn't like it, but 3 weeks later, I was still thinking about it. And therefore, there must have been something in that movie, that I want to re-examine, and that I want, because it's stuck in me. It's put its hooks into me. And so I think sometimes I have felt like there's something in there that I need to get back to, or there's something in there that, even though it wasn't a completely 5-star experience for me, there is something compelling. There is something that's making me want to pick at that scab, or like there's a weird smell to it that isn't wholly unpleasant. And that's the kind of stuff that is intriguing and that invites a reread sometimes, as you were saying earlier, Matthew, something that's brilliant, I can leave it for a couple of years. I can sort of bask in that glow. And something that is less than brilliant might require immediate reinvestigation. So, and then there are things that are so awfully bad that you want to reread them to make sure that you didn't make stuff up. Like, was I imagining that? So I remember reading a lot of bad stuff about the Marvel Comics Trouble, which, if you don't know, is the Aunt May and Peter Parker's moms as teenagers and pregnancy. And when I read it, I was just like, I can't believe this. This is as bad as people have described it. And then I was like, hold on, did I just read the whole thing thinking it's the worst thing ever done because that's the reputation it has? And maybe I should read it more neutrally, as if I'd picked it up on a bookshelf and it had the Marvel logo on it. So I reread it, even though I thought it was bad, because I thought that I had been affected by other people calling it the worst comic ever made. So I reread it to have my own opinion on it, in which case I realized that no, it really is that bad. It's terrible.
It reminds me of what I just read a quote or saw an interview with Alan Moore, and I don't know how dated it was, but he was talking about how writers should read horrible works regularly. Like, you should read really bad books regularly, because it will show, you'll start to realize that you could do it better. And then you'll actually go out and start writing. So he said, for writers, read those really bad books, find all the plots where they fail, because that will allow you to do your own thing at hopefully a much better level, or you'll see how challenging it is. And I love that idea of like, can we read garbage stuff sometimes? And can we reread it to see why it's garbage sometimes?
Yeah. I mean, well, Gore says he rarely uses the word love. And Sleepy Reader says, I wonder if Anshuman rates them as video worthy or not. Well, not only do I not use the word love rarely, I've gone ahead and put it in the title of my video channel. Because it's very much about that. Yeah, there are lots of comics that I don't love, but which ones am I going to make a whole production out of? Like, literally, right? I've got to like edit and listen to my own voice over and over again and stare at my stupid face over and over again and cut. It better be a good comic. It better be something I love. So I don't think that love is like an absolute thing. That's why I think the numerical systems or letter grades for me don't work, is I'll say, this is a 4 out of 10 and this is a 5 out of 10. And then someone will say, how can you think that is better? Because this is about the Second World War and this is about fart jokes. And I'm like, well, it's just a better comic about what it wants to be about. And it's doing a much better job telling me about farts than this is doing in telling me about World War II. But, there's a sort of disconnect there when you look at those grades and when you look at those comics and things like that. So I use the word love a lot because there's a lot to love, honestly. And it doesn't mean that something is perfect or without flaws or cannot be criticized in any way. It just means that in spite of those, and maybe sometimes because of those things, it rises to a certain level of accomplishment and personal attachment for me. And that's usually, to answer your question, that's usually what I would return to. That's usually because irrespective of what it means to someone else, it means something to me that is akin to love, but it's not necessarily the same love that I feel for something else I'm rereading. It's kind of different in each case, which is hopefully what we want to do with our channels and our conversations as well, to say that I can talk about this European comic, and I can talk about this American newspaper strip comic, and I can talk about this Japanese comic, and I can love all of them for very different reasons, and I want to revisit them similarly for very different reasons.
I think that's kind of the importance of, doing things on sort of different platforms and kind of treating things different kind of ways. Like personally, if it was my choice, I wouldn't use a star system either. I use a star system purely because I use Goodreads and it asks for a star rating, and the star rating somewhat is going to prompt someone to read your actual review that you've written underneath that. So if it's like really low star rating, they're going to want to know why. And if it's a really high star rating, they're going to want to know why. And if it's just 3 in the middle every time, they're going to be like, well, it's probably okay, kind of thing. But when it comes to YouTube, I've never used a rating system for anything that I've talked about. I just talk about the elements that I enjoy and the elements that I don't enjoy and what you might get out of it, because I find that platform, this platform, gives you that space to use so much more language and explain the intricacies of what it was that made you enjoy it this time or not, as the case may be.
Yeah. I personally like star systems, but they're meant for me, right? It's meant so that I can basically like look at what I gave something and just give a general like, oh, that's right, that was my impression. Because I don't like, I'll read some of the, and it's not to knock people that do this on Goodreads with the reviews, but when they review the book, they'll go through the whole plot and everything that's going on, what they liked, what they didn't. There'll be these pages and pages of what they wrote up. I don't want to do that. I want to basically have 3 or 4 sentences in there, give it a star review so I can refresh my memory at some point if I want to go back and look at it. And that's kind of why I do it. But I understand, For the Love of Comics, this idea of art and we're trying to grade it, or what, like you just mentioned too, Highland G, this idea of art, we try to grade it. And for me, it's just an arbitrary thing, really, to a large point. But yeah.
I mean, to me, as I say, it's a sort of generalism of the experience, So as I said, it's not something that I kind of jump into. But having said that, if I do give something a 5-star rating on Goodreads, then I'm probably going to talk about it a lot. I'm probably going to have a large review in there, and I'm probably going to make a YouTube video about it because clearly it has some kind of impact.
Yeah. I mean, to me, there's nothing more bizarre than someone giving a 5-star review and nothing is written.
That's me. That's me.
Which, but and of course, this is a debate for a different live stream about grades and scores and all that stuff. But I just like to point out, Blackpool, with all respect, is that it didn't work though, because you wanted to reread something that was a 3.5, so your score didn't represent what you felt about it at a numerical level. I think it's only your example that I find to be fascinating, because the way something sticks in our head isn't on a linear scale only. It's a lot more 3-dimensional, and the way that you respond to it, or the way you remember it, or the way you feel about it, I feel it's interesting that you went and looked at it, and when you saw 3.5, you were surprised. I think if you were constantly looking at it, it might have kept you from imagining it as something you wanted to reread, because you would have always thought about it as a 3.5 book. And so therefore, what I worry about is that numerical conclusion taking precedence and then becoming the only statement about something, and everything else being a form of rationalizing the 3.5, of saying, why is it a 3.5? Or, like, as in 3.5 is the truth. Here is my reasons why. Whereas for me, what you're talking about is actually there's all of this stuff there that I want to kind of summarize as a 3.5. Like that's really your intention, but the way it will be received by everyone who visits Goodreads and the whole world in general is going to be flipping that. It's going to put, like saying, I am, therefore I think, it will put Descartes before the horse. So that's the idea that I want to avoid by having conversation or nuanced debate or discussion instead of having letter grades. Not because they don't serve a purpose, but because they're misinterpreted as being the first thing and everything else as being the rationalization.
Yeah. And like I had said, right, it's about me. I do it for me. I don't give a shit what anybody else on Goodreads thinks about my ratings and my stars and whether they should read it or not. People should read, people should collect, people should do what they love and what they want. Right. So yeah, it's really just that gauge indicator. And like you said, it's almost like thinking back to the rereads that we talked about earlier. It's a moment in time. That stamp of the 3.5 was just book completed. This is where I'm at right now. And that's one moment in time. And that's why another reason why I think rereads are so good, right? Because we can go and challenge if that's really true. I remember reading Stephen King's Eyes of the Dragon back in high school and just loving it, thinking it was one of the best things I ever read. And I tried to read it about 10 years ago. I'm like, wow, this is kind of drivel at this point. Just like, it was what I needed to read at high school, and it fueled me and it made me love it. But it just at this moment in time, it was completely different. So completely arbitrary, these numbers.
So the book that you looked at the star rating for, did you look at the star rating before rereading the book?
No.
So it was after you reread the book.
Yep.
And after you reread the book, just out of interest as someone who, you are someone who likes the star rating, were you thinking of a higher star rating when you went and looked at that?
Yes. I was thinking I probably gave it like a 4 or 4.5, which is, like I said, that's one of those books I consider like, you should definitely read and maybe consider owning it as well. And go ahead. So
kind of putting the star rating aside then, that kind of proves our point a little bit that when you're in a different place in life, rereading something, you can have a completely different experience to what you had the first time.
Yeah. That's what I said. It's just, it's a moment in time that I put the stamp on there.
Yeah.
And it's because I'm a lazy MF. I don't want to have to write up a big review. I don't want to have to put in all these different thoughts. I want to basically mark my territory like a dog and then move on to the next fire hydrant, grab the next book and dive into that. It's different for everybody on how much, it's why we see some people have, paragraphs and paragraphs of reviews out there, and some people just put a star and then they're done with it. And for the most part, a lot of times that's what I am. I'll just put a star system on it, maybe a word, sentence or two, and then move on. It's just really
my concern would be going the other way and like having all your stuff star rated and then being like, I want to reread something, and then filtering only to your 5-star books and be like, right, I'm only going to reread 5-star books.
No, the only time I do that,
you don't want to influence your new reads off of the old rating.
The only time I do like the 5, when I actually look at like where my stars are, like, what were all my 5 stars? It's usually at the end of the year. I'm usually curious of like, what were my top 5 reads? And so I'll go out to Goodreads and look at all the 5-star books from that year and kind of take from like this year, take a look at what ones are going, these were my main top ones. No, I never go the other way. Because part of it for me is, like I said, 3 stars a book that's for me is a book that I think is worthy of a read, but you don't need to own it. So all my books on my shelves are either, for the most part, either books that I haven't read yet or are 4 or 5 stars. If it doesn't hit the 4-star mark in my mind, it automatically goes to the resale shop where I ship it out.
Yeah.
That's kind of I'm only keeping stuff that I plan to actually do a reread on.
Yeah, because my concern would be that you're emotionally hyped to reread this book. You go and you look at your star rating, and then your star rating actually puts you in a mental place that you're not going to enjoy the reread because it's been rated low previously.
My mind actually thinks that's more interesting. No, my mind actually thinks that's more interesting. My mind goes, wow, I can't wait to reread this book. And I go look at the review and I'm like, wow, I didn't give it a really good review. Then it's kind of like For Love of Comics was talking about, like something still sitting in there resonating, and I want to go explore where is this disconnect between what I thought I really wanted to explore this, and when I came out of it, it didn't live up to exactly where I thought it was going to be. So yeah, my mind kind of goes to a little bit of a different spot at that point.
Yeah. I like this idea of thinking about it then not as a single numerical score, but saying Matthew Blackpoll on this date and this year at this point of time felt this book was these many stars. You know, like that's a story in a sentence, which isn't just that isolated number. Because I understand what Highland G is saying also. There are a lot of people who'll be like, give me the highest rated. And what is the highest rated? The highest rated comics are the ones that are averaging these stars. And the highest rated comics will be coming from people giving stars and a lot of people giving stars. And it's the same way that Amazon reviews and all of these things aggregate things. And I'm like, I'm reading this, and there's someone who's given a Lego minifigure 1 star and saying, they gave me a tiny little thing. And I'm like, do you not know what a minifigure is? I mean, like, this is a stupid reason to give a 1 star, but it's affecting the score. Or, you know, my package arrived damaged. And like, that's not a product review, that's a shipping review. And over again. And there'll be somebody like, I can't believe they wrote a woman as a hero. That's stupid. You know, and just like, oh, that's not a reason to give a 1 star. But all of these things are adding up to lowering, you know, this whole review tomato or Rotten Tomatoes review bombing and all of these things. They're all created by these pseudo numerical systems. And if I was to read what these people are saying, I would like, that doesn't apply. That doesn't apply. I'm not racist. I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that. None of these scores matter. But if I wanted to see what the average is that the book has, and this is a 9.8 versus that is a 4.7, that's coming from aggregating those things. So those are the things that I think are problematic when talking about art. And I understand what you're saying. It's only for you, but you are doing it on a public platform, and that is getting added to the public record, and it is becoming part of the reputation of that book, according, you know, like people talk about that has a Goodreads score of X or something like that.
But let me ask you the most important question. Do I care?
The most?
Do I care? Right? I don't give a shit. If people want, you know, I don't care what happens to it once it goes out there, right? It's like I said, it's all about, for me, people need to explore and find out what they want to. That's the only way I became the reader that I am, is by trying the things that people said were horrible or people said that were great and realizing they didn't resonate with me. And we start to winnow down. If people are only basing it off of the rating systems, hopefully they eventually learn that that's not the judge and jury to go about deciding how they do it. So it doesn't bother me at all.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Of course. Yeah. You know, I'm just saying that the platform that says that this is the way you do it is a platform that encourages that way of looking at things. You know, our participation in these platforms then encourage their existence and their behavior in that way. I mean, it's true for everything, you know, and so it's not a single Goodreads or you or anyone out in that way. It's just another reason. Like if when people say, "Hey, do you have a Goodreads?" I'm like, I don't have a Goodreads. I have long, boring live streams and vlogs on YouTube. You know, that's what I have, because that's the best way I find. With all of the nuance and all of the messiness and all of the nonsense, that's the way I want to do it. I don't want to put 4.5 or 3.5 because I know that you guys will read what I've written, but I know the vast majority won't, and I'll contribute to that by only adding that kind of numerical thing. But this idea of tracking what you are reading and looking back on what you have read, that I think is it's a fascinating thing. You know, I think that's a lovely, and I think that Damien was also mentioning that before Goodreads, he would never have thought of it. So I do think that's a very valuable diary sort of record keeping that these platforms allow us to do. I just wish that there was a way to do it without numerical scores and stars, personally.
I think the interesting thing with it, if you step away from a second from how you're impacting other people's first reads, and we focus on it being a reread kind of element, being able to take what those mean. So you mentioned earlier that like a 3 star is something that you would typically be looking to get rid of. So if we take that as the statement, that book was previously rated as I would have got rid of this, and now it's rated as I would potentially recommend to somebody else. That change is interesting. Like ignoring the numbers, just looking at it from a reread and what your experience is, and it has changed.
Yeah.
Also, if it was your website and your website had your legend where it says, this is what I mean by 5-star, this is what I mean by 4-star, this is what I mean, and I've seen these like magazines and publications do that. And while not perfect, I mean, like that's better because it's got a context to it and it gives the particular personal view, which is what we're looking for. And Seth D. Horney's Good, Okay, Bad, the home of the 3-star review. It's one of the best websites on comics that, and I 31 Days of Comics is just one of the few things that I've stolen from him because he's got such a great way of talking about things, but he does end up giving a star review, but he's got 1, 2, and 3, and it's good, okay, and bad. Like that's what 3 stars is good, 2 stars is okay, and 1 star is bad. And then it's like it doesn't matter what anybody else's system is. You go to that site, you read his stuff, and it's just lovely, autobiographical, vloggy, ranting and whatnot. It's very, very individual, but it's his conclusion on his opinion, but it's just in good, okay, or bad. And that is a thing where I'm like, okay, that's a 3-star system, but I can live with that. He's contextualized it enough, and he's given it enough shape for that numerical aspect not to be that off-putting.
Yeah, and I think we talked about this earlier. Or I did, anyways. This idea of we have hereditary influences, we have evolutionary influences. Our minds look for patterns. Our minds look for putting things into boxes, and some of them do it to a greater or lesser extent, right? And so it's not that we can't train them to do something different, but it's how my mind conceives where I'm at that moment with that book. And I can't control. And Goodreads is just a tool that I use for myself. I know it goes out there, everybody else, right? But my mind works easy. It's kind of like for thousands of years, if we saw something that looked like the shape of a lion down by the water, we would turn and go the other way, even if it was just the wind blowing the reeds the right way, because we see these patterns. And so I look for what's ever easiest for me to get a sense of what the book is. But I think, it'd be like, I think about like going into like, an art museum and then saying, oh, that picture's a 3, that picture's a 4, that picture's a 5. That would just be absurd to a certain extent, right? No.
But then, having said that,
yeah,
if that was a personal list and you were to do that 1 year and then go back to that exact same museum with those exact same pictures and blindly review the whole museum again 5 years later, it'd be interesting to see how your personal numbers change.
Yeah, it'd probably be completely different. Like I said, I think that's why that rubber stamp at that moment in time, I hold that loosely in my own ratings, and I'm willing to go back and explore those books.
So it works much better as a personal thing than it does as a aggregated thing.
Oh, completely. Like I said, I don't do it for anybody else out in Goodreads. I don't, to me, the best part of Goodreads is the dopamine hit I get from hitting book is read. And then going to Storygraph and doing the same thing. Hitting book is read. Like I got that book read. All right, there's one, and then moving on to the next one, starting up the next one. That's the best part for me, is just the little dopamine I get from, I completed this little thing I set out to do. I get a little satisfaction in that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But even
go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to say, just getting back to your overall kind of question a little bit more, even if we were to replace 5-star with, masterpiece as the term, right?
Sure.
And you're saying, I only reread books that I consider a masterpiece.
Yeah.
Right. I would probably say, no, I reread the book that I'm inspired to read at that point in time. I'm not rereading it because I consider it a masterpiece, and I only reread masterpieces.
Yeah.
I only reread masterpieces unless it's trouble or something like that. It's just like, but it does tend to be that way, and I've found that to be also the cases with movies and things like that, where I might have a little bit more tolerance, and then I'll be like, oh, let's watch this again, even though it's not great because it's got some funny bits in it, or it's, because again, it's got that little bit of time, and I know it's maximum 2 hours. But when it comes to something that's reading, it's a serious commitment. So I'm averse to wanting to make that commitment for something that's less than superlative in many ways, or at least it has to be worthwhile in a number of ways for me to want to revisit it, unless there is a morbid curiosity that is piqued by somebody saying, oh, that was terrible and I thought it was good, or I thought it was terrible and someone is saying it's excellent. Then I'm like, what did I miss? So every now and then there'll be that curiosity, but that will be sparked by an external factor, someone else saying something. That's what's sparking me. If it's coming from within me, it's coming for that nostalgia, for that comfort, all of which is in masterpiece. It's masterpiece nostalgia, it's masterpiece childhood comfort or something like that.
Or you could even split it slightly further, which is where I could kind of agree with and disagree with the question at different points, is that if you were to say, do you only reread masterpieces? I'd probably say no. I probably reread most of my collection because I keep my collection relatively kind of concise, so I don't have a huge collection of kind of books. But if you were to say to me, do you only reread more than 5 times masterpieces? I'd probably say yes. I'm not going to come back to a book 4 times if I didn't think it was great.
Yeah. Well, actually, I mean, so we could flip that around, and this goes back to what we started talking about is, I forget who said this. They said, how do I know what I mean until I read what I have written? I don't know if it was Dorothy Parker or maybe Doris Lessing, but it's something like that. It's like, how do I know it's 5 stars unless I reread it? Or how do I know it's a masterpiece unless I read it 5 times? And then when it holds up and it continues to reward me, then I know that it's a masterpiece. That's what makes it a 5-star read. Like, it's not a 5-star because of the one initial reaction I had. It's 5 stars because every time I've returned to it, it's been brilliant and getting more brilliant. I think that's that whole art being revisited sort of thing, is that the conclusion is 5 stars because of the rereading, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
The kind of I've grown to love it even more element rather than just
well, that's what a masterpiece is. A masterpiece can never be judged, I think, in one sitting. I mean, you can have an inkling that it might be a masterpiece. I'll have to watch it again, or I'll have to read it again to be sure. You might have a hint that it's in that direction, but you really need that revisitation. You need that re-examination in order to confirm your suspicions that it's a masterpiece.
Well, I got to say, both of you guys are 5 stars and masterpieces. So I'm putting star ratings on both of you guys for working through this topic
how
today.
linear of you, sir.
Yes. Well, you did for Love Comics. You just got 5.25 now, so
Wow.
up a little bit there. Yeah, I think we're kind of towards the end. Any other final comments you are interested in sharing around rereads? It's been from my standpoint, it's been a great discussion because we got into a lot of the philosophical sides. We got some ideas on the intentionality on how to actually bring some rereading into our lives. I'm hoping Gore Vidal's lawyers don't come and sue me. I'm hoping we get the Strangers in Paradise reread. Yeah. Anything you guys would like to close with?
I'd like everyone in the chat, if you haven't hit like, to hit like so that the live stream is visible to more people. That's a thing that Highland G is too shy to ask you to do. But also, I'll say that thanks for everyone who joined us in the chat. If you joined after the conversation has been going for a while, I'd recommend you go back and listen to it from the beginning, just because we're such mellifluous voices. How can you miss that out? But I think a lot of points that people are bringing up right now are points that we also discussed. Things about returning to something and it being lesser, things about it being better or getting better with a reread. What's the difference? All of these things are, I think, a fascinating conversation. But thank you so much, Highland G, for hosting us. Thank you so much, Matthew, for running the show with such a plum. I think, you should just be in You should be in charge of these and allow G and me to sit back a little and do our little comedy sketches.
What is that? Does that saying about the insane running the asylum? Yeah.
I'll just promote more debating between me and you, so it's all good by me.
How about you, G? Any final words before we head out for the night?
I don't know. Like, I think we've covered a lot of things. I always enjoy the fact that we you know, kind of like we've mentioned in reading, everybody kind of has their own, you know, sort of points in life, their own experiences, their own kind of takes on things, and that can affect, you know, how you enjoy a book and when you enjoy a book, you know. But I think that also for us impacts our discussions and makes them much more interesting, because we're from, you know, various different, you know, backgrounds, ages, countries, and so on, and we really get to delve into these kind of questions a bit kind of more. So like one of the guys was joking earlier that we're kind of like the comic trio kind of thing for kind of delving into kind of stuff, and like I really like that idea. I like people, you know, like getting a mixed kind of discussion around things, and it not just being, you know, the one-sided kind of thing, because although any one of us could review a book or review a topic, that's going to be a sort of one-sided kind of thing. So being able to kind of have these discussions, even if we might butt heads on something or skirt all the way around a subject and back again, like it makes it really interesting and fun. So like I always enjoy, you know, having the discussion.
Yeah, me too. Thank you guys. It's been a pleasure. Thanks everybody in the comments. Gore, good to see you. Damien, everybody else. It was a great topic. Thanks for having me on, Highland G. Always fun to be with you guys.
Thank you.
Yep.
Bye.
Cool. And we'll end it there then.
All right.